My name is Alia Hunt, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered that the man I called father for 23 years murdered my real parents. But let me start at the beginning. Or rather, let me start at the birthday party where everything fell apart. I was 28 years old, living in a cramped studio flat in Shoreditch, working as a freelance architect. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I'd spent the last 5 years building my career from nothing, taking whatever projects I could get, renovating cafes, designing tiny house extensions, once even sketching out a garden shed for a retired banker who paid me in cash and homemade marmalade. London rent was brutal, and some months I barely scraped by, but I was proud of my independence. I'd learned early that I couldn't rely on anyone but myself. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped through my letterbox in a cream envelope with my name written in elegant calligraphy. I almost threw it away, thinking it was wedding spam. But when I opened it, I recognized the Hunt family crest embossed at the top. You are cordially invited to Richard Hunt's 50th birthday celebration. Saturday, 7 p.m. Ashworth Manor, Cotswolds. I stared at that invitation for a long time, sitting on my worn sofa with cold tea going lukewarm in my hands. Richard Hunt, the man who'd adopted me when I was 5 years old. The man I hadn't spoken to in over 2 years. Part of me wanted to tear it up. The Hunts had made it perfectly clear I wasn't really family. But another part of me, the part that still remembered being 5 years old and desperate for a family to belong to, wondered if maybe this was an olive branch. Maybe after all these years, Richard wanted to reconnect. I was an idiot for hoping. That Saturday, I drove my battered Toyota out of London, heading northwest toward the Cotswolds. The countryside opened up around me, all rolling green hills and honey-colored stone villages. It was beautiful in that specifically English way, ancient and pastoral and deeply unimpressed by anything modern. Ashworth Manor appeared at the end of a long gravel drive, a Georgian masterpiece with perfectly manicured lawns and climbing roses. This wasn't Richard's primary residence, that was a townhouse in Belgravia, but it was where the Hunts threw their big parties, where they wanted to show off. I parked between a Bentley and a Range Rover, suddenly very conscious of my old car's scratched paintwork and the way the passenger door didn't quite close properly. Inside, the manor was already full of guests. Maybe 40 people, all dressed in elegant cocktail attire, drinking champagne and laughing in that effortless way wealthy people have. I recognized a few faces, business associates of Richard's, some family friends, people I'd seen at Christmas dinners years ago who'd never quite remembered my name. I was wearing my only good dress, a simple black number I'd bought on sale 3 years ago. It was fine, appropriate. But looking around at the other women in their designer dresses and statement jewelry, I felt like a child playing dress-up. Alia, a voice cut through the chatter. I turned to see Oliver Hunt making his way toward me. Oliver was Richard's son, well, one of them. He was 31 now, tall and fair-haired like his father, dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. We'd grown up together, sort of. In the way that two people living in the same house can grow up in completely different worlds. Oliver, I said, managing a smile, it's been a while. 2 years, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. You look well. So do you? This was how we talked now, polite, distant, like acquaintances at a networking event. Is Vivienne here? I asked, though I already knew the answer. In the conservatory holding court. Oliver took a sip of his champagne. She's just made partner at her firm. You'll hear about it approximately 800 times tonight. There it was, a flash of the old Oliver, the one who used to make sarcastic comments under his breath during family dinners. But then his expression closed off again, back to polite neutrality. I should go say hello to Richard, I said. Oliver nodded. He's in the drawing room. Fair warning, he's already 3 whiskeys in. I found Richard exactly where Oliver said he'd be, standing by the fireplace surrounded by a group of men in suits. He was 50 today, though he looked older. His hair had gone mostly gray, and there were deep lines around his eyes and mouth. He'd always been a handsome man in that stern, authoritative way. Now he just looked tired. He saw me approaching, and something flickered across his face. Surprise? Discomfort? It was gone too quickly for me to identify. Alia, he said, his voice carefully neutral. You came. Happy birthday, Richard. I'd stopped calling him Dad when I was 16, after he forgot to pick me up from school for the 3rd time in a month and I'd had to walk home in the rain. He'd never asked me to start calling him Dad again. Thank you. He turned to the men around him. Gentlemen, this is Alia. She's part of the family. The pause before part of the family was microscopic, but I heard it. I'd learned to hear those pauses. One of the men smiled politely. Lovely to meet you. How do you know Richard? Before I could answer, Richard said, Alia was adopted into the family some years ago, after her parents passed. Was adopted. Past tense, as if I'd been a temporary arrangement. I excused myself and headed for the conservatory, needing air and space and maybe another glass of champagne to get through this evening. The conservatory was beautiful, all glass and iron framework, filled with exotic plants and comfortable wicker furniture. And there, in the center of it all like a queen on her throne, was Vivienne Hunt. Vivienne was 33, impeccably dressed in a cream silk dress that probably cost more than my car, her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon. She was beautiful in that sharp, intimidating way. She'd always been beautiful, even when we were children, and she was using that beauty to get away with making my life miserable. She was surrounded by a group of women, all laughing at something she'd just said. When she saw me, her smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew wider. Alia, she called out loud enough that several people turned to look. You actually came, how wonderful. I walked over, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. Vivienne being this friendly was never a good sign. Hello, Vivienne, congratulations on making partner. Thank you, darling, it's been a whirlwind, truly. Though I suppose you wouldn't know much about that world, architecture is so different from law, isn't it? Much more artistic, less rigorous. One of the women laughed. I couldn't tell if she was laughing with Vivienne or at me. I'm sure Alia's work is very fulfilling, another woman said, her tone suggesting she thought it was anything but. Oh, absolutely, Vivienne agreed. And we're all so proud of her for making it on her own. No family money, no connections, just pure determination. It's quite inspiring, really. This was Vivienne's specialty, saying things that sounded complimentary but were actually designed to remind everyone that I was different, that I didn't belong. I was saved from having to respond by the sound of someone clinking a glass. Richard was standing in the center of the drawing room, calling for attention. Thank you all for coming tonight, he began. It means the world to have you here to celebrate this milestone. I stood at the edge of the crowd, half hidden behind a potted palm, as Richard gave his speech. He thanked his business partners, his friends, his children. He talked about the company he'd built, the life he'd created, the legacy he hoped to leave. He didn't mention me once, not that I expected him to, but still. Some small, stupid part of me had hoped. After the speech, dinner was announced. We all moved into the dining room, where 2 long tables had been set with crystal and silver and elaborate floral arrangements. I found my place card near the end of the second table, between 2 people I didn't recognize. Vivienne was at the head of the first table, next to Richard. Oliver was there too, along with all the important guests, the business associates, the wealthy friends, the people who mattered. I was with the overflow. The plus ones and distant cousins and people who weren't quite significant enough for the main table. Dinner was delicious, some kind of beef Wellington, followed by a lemon tart that melted on the tongue. I made polite conversation with my table companions, a banker named Philip and his wife whose name I didn't catch. They asked what I did, and when I said I was an architect, they looked mildly interested for about 30 seconds before changing the subject. I was picking at my dessert when Vivienne's voice cut across the room. Oh, before we finish, I wanted to make a special toast. She stood up, glass in hand, her smile bright and sharp. To the real Hunt family, the ones who built this legacy, who have been here from the beginning. People raised their glasses, murmuring agreement. Then Vivienne's eyes found mine across the room. This toast is for real Hunts only? Alia, she paused, and I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. You're technically staff, aren't you? Given how Dad paid for your upbringing and all, why don't you help in the kitchen? I'm sure they could use an extra pair of hands. The room went silent. Then someone laughed, then someone else. Then the whole room was filled with polite laughter, the kind that's worse than outright cruelty because it's disguised as a joke. I sat there, frozen, my champagne glass halfway to my lips. My face burned. My hands trembled. Richard said nothing, just looked down at his plate. Oliver shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak up. And Vivienne smiled at me triumphant. I stood up carefully, setting down my glass with a hand that shook only slightly. I walked out of that dining room with my head up, even though I wanted to run, even though I wanted to disappear. I made it to the entrance hall before Vivienne caught up with me. Alia, wait, she said, her voice dripping with false concern. I was only joking, you're so sensitive. I'm leaving. Don't be dramatic. She pulled something from her clutch, a cream envelope. Here, I wanted to give you this, consider it. Payment for services rendered. I took the envelope automatically, too shocked to refuse. That's £3,800, Vivienne said. A rough calculation of what you cost the family over the years. Food, clothes, that dreadful state school education, where even now, you don't owe us anything and we don't owe you anything. She pressed the envelope into my hands and walked back to the party, leaving me standing alone in the entrance hall with £3,800 and the shattered remains of my dignity. I drove back to London that night, crying so hard I had to pull over twice. When I finally made it back to my flat at 2 in the morning, I threw Vivienne's envelope on the counter without opening it and fell into bed fully closed. I'd never wanted to be part of the Hunt family. I'd spent years building a life separate from them, telling myself I didn't need their approval or their money or their love. But standing there in that beautiful manner, being laughed at by people who didn't know me, being paid off like a servant by the woman I'd once thought of as a sister, it brought everything back. Every childhood slight, every moment of feeling like I didn't belong, every time someone reminded me I wasn't really a Hunt. I fell asleep wondering why I'd ever hoped things might be different. I woke up to my phone ringing. It was Monday morning, and I'd spent Sunday in bed, alternating between crying and staring at the ceiling. My eyes were puffy, my head ached, and I seriously considered not answering. But the number was unfamiliar, and I had several clients who might be calling about projects, so I picked up. "Miss Hunt?" A man's voice, formal and cultured. "This is Philip Garrett." "I'm a solicitor with Garrett and Associates. I apologize for calling so early, but I need to speak with you regarding a matter of some urgency." I sat up, suddenly awake. "What kind of matter?" "It concerns the estate of Lady Catherine Hunt. I understand you knew her." "Lady Catherine? Richard's mother? I hadn't thought about her in months." "Yes," I said slowly. "But, isn't she?" "Lady Catherine passed away 3 months ago," Philip confirmed. "The family held a private funeral. However, she left specific instructions regarding her will, and you're named as a beneficiary. I need you to come to my office this Wednesday at 10 o'clock for the reading." I was confused. "I don't understand. Why wasn't I told about the funeral, and why would she leave me anything?" "Those are questions I can't answer over the phone, Miss Hunt, but it's imperative that you attend. The address is 42 Lincoln's Inn Fields, Wednesday at 10. Can I count on you to be there?" "Yes, I'll be there." He hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in confusion. Lady Catherine Hunt had been dead for 3 months, and no one had told me. The funeral had happened, and I hadn't been invited. Why would they keep that from me? I thought back to the last time I'd seen her. It had been about 2 years ago, shortly before I stopped having any contact with the Hunt family. She'd called me to her townhouse in Chelsea, not the Belgravia place where Richard lived, but her own private residence. Lady Catherine had been in her late 80s then, sharp as ever despite her age. She'd built a pharmaceutical company from nothing in the 1960s, sold it for a fortune in the 90s, and spent her retirement managing her investments and terrorizing her family with her blunt observations. She'd always been kind to me, more than kind. When I was a child, she was the only person in the Hunt family who treated me like I mattered. "Alia," she'd said during that last visit, pouring tea with steady hands, "I want you to know something. You're stronger than all of them combined. Richard, Vivienne, Oliver, they've never had to fight for anything, but you have. That makes you special." "I don't feel special," I'd said. "I feel like an outsider." "Good, outsiders see things clearly." She'd fixed me with those sharp blue eyes. "I'm working on something, my dear, something important, but I need time. Promise me you'll be patient." "What are you working on?" "Truth," she'd said cryptically. "Justice, the things that matter." I hadn't understood what she meant, and before I could ask more, Richard had arrived to take her to some appointment. That was the last time we'd spoken, and now she was dead, and apparently she'd left me something in her will. Wednesday morning, I dressed carefully in my only suit, navy blue, professional, slightly too big because I'd lost weight and couldn't afford alterations. I took the tube to Holborn and walked to Lincoln's Inn Fields, a beautiful square surrounded by historic buildings that housed some of London's most prestigious law firms. Garrett and Associates occupied a Georgian townhouse with polished brass fixtures and a reception area that smelled of old money and leather-bound books. A receptionist directed me to a conference room on the first floor. I was early, so I had to wait. I sat in a chair by the window watching people walk through the square below and tried not to think about what was happening. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened and Philip Garrett entered. He was maybe 55, with silver hair and a kind face that was currently set in professional neutrality. "Miss Hunt, thank you for coming." He shook my hand, then gestured to the conference table. "Please sit, the others should be here shortly." The others? The rest of the family. Lady Catherine's will concern several beneficiaries. My stomach dropped. I was going to see them again. Richard, Vivienne, Oliver, 3 days after that disastrous birthday party? Perfect. They arrived 10 minutes later, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richard came in first, his face carefully blank when he saw me. He took a seat at the far end of the table without greeting me. Oliver followed, giving me an awkward nod before sitting next to his father. And then Vivienne swept in, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She stopped short when she saw me. "What is she doing here?" Vivienne demanded. "Miss Hunt is a beneficiary," Philip said calmly. "Please sit down, Miss Hunt, we're ready to begin." Vivienne's eyes narrowed, but she sat. She whispered something to Oliver that I couldn't hear, but I caught the word ridiculous. Philip opened a leather folder and pulled out several documents. "Thank you all for coming. We're here today to read the last will and testament of Catherine Eleanor Hunt, who passed away on June 15th of this year." He began reading. Legal language, mostly, about Lady Catherine being of sound mind and body when the will was drafted, about revoking all previous wills, about appointing executors. Then he got to the bequests. "To my son, Richard Michael Hunt, I leave my personal jewelry collection to be distributed as he sees fit among the family." Richard nodded slightly. The jewelry was probably worth a couple £100,000, nice, but not life-changing for someone as wealthy as Richard. "To my granddaughter, Vivienne Sarah Hunt, I leave my art collection, currently housed at Ashworth Manor. Estimated value, £200,000. Vivienne smiled. She'd always loved those paintings. "To my grandson, Oliver James Hunt, I leave my collection of vintage automobiles, currently stored at Ashworth Manor. Estimated value, £150,000. Oliver looked pleased. He'd probably sell them immediately. I waited for my name, wondering what small token Lady Catherine had left me. Maybe some books. Maybe a piece of jewelry that had sentimental value but wasn't worth much. Philip continued reading. "To Alia Margaret Hunt, I leave the following." I leaned forward slightly. "Hunt Manor estate in Cotswolds, including the main house, guest cottages, and all associated land. Current market value, £4.2 million. The room went absolutely silent. I stared at Philip, certain I'd misheard. £4 million, but he wasn't finished. "I also leave to Alia Margaret Hunt my investment portfolio, managed by Rothschild & Co., current value approximately £8.5 million. Vivienne made a small sound, like she'd been punched. "Additionally, I leave to Alia Margaret Hunt my shares in Hunt Properties Limited, a 40% controlling stake in the company, currently valued at approximately £12 million. Richard's face had gone pale. "The total value of assets bequeathed to Miss Alia Hunt is approximately £24.7 million, plus all liquid assets in my personal accounts at Coutts Bank, currently totaling £3.3 million. Philip looked up from the document. "In total, £28 million. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. I felt like I was floating somewhere outside my body, watching this happen to someone else. £28 million. Lady Catherine had left me £28 million, then all hell broke loose. Vivienne shot to her feet so violently her chair fell backward. "This is insane, she can't do this, that money is ours, we're her real family." "This is clearly invalid," Richard said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "My mother wasn't in her right mind. She was elderly, probably suffering from dementia. Lady Catherine was of completely sound mind," Philip interrupted. "She had 3 separate medical assessments done when she updated this will 18 months ago. All 3 doctors confirmed her mental competence. I have their reports here. I don't care what some doctors said." Vivienne was practically shouting now. "She manipulated my grandmother. She pointed at me with a shaking finger. "She poisoned her mind against us." "I didn't," I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken since they'd arrived. "I barely saw Lady Catherine over the last few years." "Liar," Vivienne hissed. "You must have been visiting her constantly, whispering poison in her ear, making her think we didn't care about her." "That's enough, Vivienne," Oliver said, though he looked shaken. "It's not enough," she turned on her brother. "Do you understand what this means? That woman," she couldn't even say my name now. "That woman is getting everything, while we get nothing." "You're getting quite a substantial amount," Philip pointed out. "The art collection alone, £200,000, Vivienne laughed, high and slightly hysterical. "Compared to 28 million? Are you joking?" Richard stood up slowly. He looked at me and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before, something cold and calculating. "We're contesting this will," he said flatly. "Obviously, this is clearly a case of undue influence. Alia took advantage of an elderly woman's affection. Lady Catherine specifically anticipated this, Philip said. He pulled out another document. She included a letter explaining her decision to be read aloud if anyone contested the will. Would you like me to read it? No, Richard said quickly, too quickly. But Vivienne said, yes, read it. I want to hear what lies she told my grandmother. Philip opened the letter. It was handwritten in Lady Catherine's distinctive script. I could see it from across the table. He began to read. To my family, Philip read in his neutral solicitor's voice. If you're hearing this letter, it means you've contested my will. I expected you would. So let me be perfectly clear, I am of sound mind. I have been evaluated by 3 separate doctors, all of whom confirm I have full mental capacity. I made this decision carefully and deliberately. Vivienne's face was getting redder with each word. I am leaving the bulk of my estate to Alia because she is the only one of you who ever loved me for myself, not for my money. Alia visited me when no one asked her to. She called to check on me. She remembered my birthday and sent me cards with handwritten notes inside. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. I had done those things. I'd loved Lady Catherine, but I'd never expected anything in return. Richard, Philip continued, you are my son and I love you, but you've become hard and cold, more interested in business than in people. You treated Alia abominably, and I will not reward that behavior. Richard's jaw clenched. Vivienne and Oliver, you are my grandchildren, and I had hopes for both of you, but you've grown into adults who value status and wealth above kindness. You've both been cruel to Alia in ways large and small. I will not leave my fortune to people who use it to hurt others. This is ridiculous, Vivienne muttered, but her voice had lost some of its fire. Alia, Philip read, and now his voice softened slightly, I know this will come as a shock, but you deserve this. You've worked hard, lived honestly, and remained kind despite everything you've been through. Use this money wisely, build something good, and don't let them bully you into giving it back. He set down the letter. That's all, he said. Lady Catherine was very thorough. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she made sure it was legally unassailable. We'll see about that, Richard said. Come on. He stood and walked out. Oliver followed immediately. Vivienne stayed behind long enough to look at me with pure hatred. You won't get away with this, she said quietly. We'll fight this in court. We'll drag you through hell, and when we're done, you won't see a single pound of that money. Then she left too, slamming the door behind her. I sat there in the sudden silence, still trying to process what had just happened. Philip cleared his throat gently. Miss Hunt, are you all right? I don't know, I said honestly. This can't be real. It's very real, I assure you. He pulled out another envelope. Lady Catherine left this for you, a personal letter. She asked that I give it to you in private. He handed me the envelope. It was heavy paper, cream-colored, with my name written on the front in Lady Catherine's handwriting. I'll give you some time alone, Philip said kindly. When you're ready, we should discuss the next steps. There's quite a lot to sort out: property transfers, account access, the shares in the company, but it can wait until you've had time to process this. He left me alone in the conference room. I stared at the envelope for a long time before I opened it. My hands were shaking. The letter inside was 4 pages long, written in that familiar blue ink. My dearest Alia, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I imagine Richard, Vivienne, and Oliver are absolutely furious. Despite everything, I smiled slightly. I need you to know the truth, Lady Catherine continued. The truth I discovered 3 years ago, the truth I kept to protect you until you were strong enough to handle it. My smile faded. Your parents, James and Sarah Mitchell, didn't die in a random house fire. The room seemed to tilt. It was arson, Alia, deliberate. And the person who set that fire was Richard. The letter fell from my hands. No, that couldn't be true, but I picked up the letter again with trembling fingers and kept reading. Richard owed your father £250,000 from a failed property deal. James was going to take him to court. Richard burned down your home to destroy the evidence, the contracts, the bank statements, everything that proved the debt. He didn't know you were supposed to be at your grandmother's house that night. You came home early because you were sick. You're the only witness, though you were too young to remember. I couldn't breathe. After the fire, Richard felt guilty. That's why he adopted you, not out of love, but out of fear and obligation. Margaret never knew the truth. When she died, Richard's guilt turned into resentment. You became a living reminder of his crime. My parents, my mother and father, the faces I could barely remember. The bedtime stories and morning cuddles and the safe, warm feeling of being loved. Richard took that from me. I discovered this 2 years ago, the letter went on, when I found old documents in Richard's safe during a visit to his office. I've been collecting evidence ever since. In the safety deposit box at Barclays Bank on Piccadilly, key enclosed with this letter, you'll find copies of everything. The business contracts between Richard and your father, bank records showing the debt, a private investigator's report confirming arson, witness statements from neighbors who saw Richard near your house the night of the fire. I looked in the envelope and found a small key. This is your inheritance, Alia. Not just money, but the truth. Your parents deserve justice. And you deserve to know what really happened. Use the evidence wisely. Richard is a dangerous man when cornered, so please be careful. And know that I love you, my dear girl. I'm so very proud of who you've become. The letter was signed with her distinctive signature. I sat there for a long time, the letter in my lap, staring at nothing. My parents hadn't died in an accident. They'd been murdered. By the man I'd called father for 23 years. I don't remember leaving Philip Garrett's office. One moment I was sitting in that conference room with Lady Catherine's letter in my hands, and the next I was standing on the street outside, blinking in the bright afternoon sunlight like I'd just emerged from a cave. People rushed past me on the pavement, lawyers in suits, tourists with cameras, a woman pushing a pram. Normal people having normal days. None of them knew that my entire world had just shattered and reformed into something unrecognizable. My parents were murdered. Richard Hunt killed them. I'd lived with their killer for 18 years. I walked. I didn't know where I was going. My feet just moved, carrying me through Lincoln's Inn Fields down Kingsway toward the river. I walked for hours, clutching Lady Catherine's letter in my handbag like it might disappear if I let go. By the time I made it back to my flat in Shoreditch, it was evening. My phone had been ringing constantly, Philip trying to reach me, probably. Maybe Richard or Vivienne, ready to hurl more accusations. I didn't check. I couldn't. I sat on my sofa in the dark and cried for the parents I barely remembered. For the life we might have had if Richard hadn't decided that £250,000 was worth more than 2 human lives. For the little girl who'd been taken in by her parents' murderer and told she should be grateful. Sometime around midnight, I stopped crying. The grief was still there, this massive weight pressing on my chest, but underneath it, something else was growing. Anger. Cold, focused, righteous anger. Lady Catherine had given me evidence. She'd given me the truth, and she'd given me the resources to do something about it. I wasn't going to let Richard get away with this. The next morning, I called in sick to my only active client, a cafe renovation in Bethnal Green, and took the tube to Piccadilly. Barclays Bank was an imposing building with marble columns and that particular hush that expensive banks have, like even sound costs extra. I presented Lady Catherine's key and my identification to a stern-looking woman at the desk. She led me to a private room and brought out a large safety deposit box. "Take all the time you need, Miss Hunt," she said, and left me alone. I opened the box with shaking hands. Inside were folders, dozens of them, all meticulously labeled in Lady Catherine's handwriting. Business contracts Richard Hunt and James Mitchell, 2002-001, bank statements Hunt Properties Limited, 2001, private investigation report Mitchell House Fire, 2001, witness statements neighbors, 2001, communication records Richard Hunt, 2001. I pulled out the first folder and started reading. The business contracts were straightforward enough. My father, James Mitchell, had been an architect. A good one, apparently. He designed several residential developments in Manchester in the late 90s. Richard, who was building his property development company, had hired James to design a luxury apartment complex in Didsbury. The contract was for £180,000, payable in installments. James had completed the work, but according to the bank statements, Richard had only paid £80,000. There were letters from James to Richard, politely asking about the outstanding balance. Then less polite letters. Then a final letter from James's solicitor, dated March 2001, threatening legal action if Richard didn't pay the remaining £100,000 plus interest, a total of £250,000 within 30 days. The fire happened 3 weeks later. I opened the private investigator's report. Lady Catherine had hired someone, a former police detective named Graham Walsh, to review the case 2 years ago. His findings were damning. The original fire investigation in 2001 had been rushed. The house was old, the wiring was faulty, the fire service concluded it was an electrical fault. Case closed. 2 people dead, 1 child orphaned, move along. But Walsh had obtained the original evidence photos. He'd interviewed the fire investigators who'd worked the case. And he'd found something the original investigation had missed or ignored, traces of accelerant in 3 different locations around the house. not in places where cleaning supplies would normally be stored, in deliberate spots, near the electrical panel, near the gas line, near the back door. Someone had made sure that house would burn fast and hot. Walsh had also found a neighbor, Mrs. Petra Novick, who'd lived across the street, who remembered seeing a black Mercedes parked near the Mitchell house around 9 o'clock the night of the fire. She'd thought it was odd because the Mitchells drove a modest Ford. She'd mentioned it to police at the time, but it had never made it into the official report. Walsh had tracked down the vehicle registration records. Richard Hunt had owned a black Mercedes in 2001. The same model Mrs. Novick described, but the most damning evidence was in the final folder, financial records. 1 week after the fire, Richard had withdrawn £50,000 in cash from his personal account. Large cash withdrawals weren't illegal, but they were unusual for someone who normally paid for everything with credit cards and bank transfers. 2 weeks after that, a man named Frank Morrison, who had 3 prior convictions for arson, had deposited £45,000 in cash into his account at a Birmingham bank. Walsh had tried to interview Morrison, but the man had died in 2011. However, Walsh had managed to contact Morrison's son, Danny Morrison, who'd confirmed that his father had done jobs for wealthy clients over the years. Jobs he didn't like to talk about. Jobs that kept Danny in private school and nice clothes despite Frank's lack of legitimate employment. I sat in that small room at Barclays Bank and read every word of every document. It took me 4 hours. When I finished, I knew exactly what had happened. Richard had owed my father £250,000. Rather than pay it, he'd hired Frank Morrison to burn down our house and destroy the evidence. Maybe he'd meant for the house to be empty. Maybe he'd checked and thought we were out. Or maybe, and this was the thought that made my stomach turn, maybe he hadn't cared. My mother, Sarah, had died of smoke inhalation. My father, James, had died trying to get to her through the flames. I'd survived only because I'd been in the small bedroom at the front of the house, the one with the window that faced the street. A firefighter had smashed through that window and pulled me out before the smoke got me. I'd been 5 years old, too young to remember details, too traumatized to give a coherent statement. So I'd been noted as in shock, unable to provide information in the police report, and everyone had moved on. Everyone except Lady Catherine, who'd found the truth 22 years later and made sure I'd have the evidence to do something about it. I gathered all the documents, made copies at a print shop near the bank, and took the originals back to my flat. I hid them in 3 different locations, some in my flat, some at my studio workspace, some in a locker at the gym I barely used. If Richard or Vivienne tried to break in and destroy the evidence, they wouldn't get everything. Then I sat down and made a plan. The police would need to be involved eventually. But I'd watched enough true crime documentaries to know that 22-year-old cases were hard to prosecute, even with good evidence. The longer ago something happened, the murkier the evidence became. Witnesses died or forgot. Physical evidence degraded. And Richard was wealthy, well-connected, and could afford the best lawyers in London. If I went to the police now, he'd deny everything. He'd say Lady Catherine was senile, that I'd manipulated her, that the evidence was fabricated. He'd tie this up in legal proceedings for years. I needed something more, something that would make it impossible for Richard to wiggle free. I needed him to confess, or at least to do something that proved his guilt beyond any doubt, which meant I needed to make him panic. That evening, I called Philip Garrett. "Miss Hunt," he answered immediately. "I've been trying to reach you. Are you all right? You left rather suddenly yesterday." "I'm fine," I said. "I needed time to process, but I'm ready now. I want to move forward with the inheritance." "Excellent, we should schedule a meeting to discuss. I also want to call a press conference," I interrupted. "For this Friday, can you help arrange that?" There was a pause. "A press conference? May I ask what you plan to say?" "I'm going to tell the truth about my parents' deaths." Another pause, longer this time. "Miss Hunt, I must advise you to be very careful. Accusations of this magnitude." "I have evidence," I said. Lady Catherine left me evidence. "I'm not making random accusations. I'm presenting facts. Can you arrange it, or should I hire a PR firm?" "I can arrange it," Philip said slowly. "But I strongly recommend you consult with a barrister first, and perhaps consider the implications. The implications are that a man murdered my parents and got away with it for 22 years. I'm done being careful, Mr. Garrett. Friday at 10 a.m., I want every major newspaper and TV station there." "Can you make that happen?" "Yes," he said finally. "I can make that happen." "Good, thank you." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized. Hard, determined. Not the Alia who'd sat quietly at the end of the table while Vivienne made jokes at her expense. Not the Alia who'd smiled politely and pretended she didn't care when Richard forgot her birthday. This Alia was done being invisible. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. Philip connected me with a barrister named Marcus Webb, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who specialized in criminal law. I met him at his chambers in Gray's Inn and showed him everything. Marcus read through the evidence with an increasingly serious expression. "This is good," he said finally. "Very good. The financial trail especially, that's hard to fake or explain away, and if we can get Danny Morrison to testify about his father's confession." "Can we prosecute?" I asked. "After all this time? Murder has no statute of limitations in the UK, neither does arson resulting in death. If the Crown Prosecution Service believes the evidence is strong enough, they can charge him." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "But I'll be honest with you, Miss Hunt. This will be a difficult case. Richard Hunt is a wealthy, respectable businessman. You're an adopted daughter who's just inherited a fortune from his mother, cutting him out. His lawyers will paint you as vindictive, as someone fabricating evidence to justify stealing his inheritance. I didn't steal anything. Lady Catherine left me her estate because she wanted to. I know that, but perception matters, especially in court." Marcus looked at me seriously. "If you go public with this, at a press conference, no less, you're declaring war. Richard Hunt will come at you with everything he has. His reputation, his wealth, his connections. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about my parents, about the life we should have had, about 22 years of living with their killer and not knowing. "Yes," I said, "I'm prepared." The press conference was held at a hotel conference room near King's Cross. Philip had done his job well. By Friday morning, there were journalists from The Guardian, The Times, the BBC, ITV, and half a dozen other outlets crowded into the room. I dressed carefully. Conservative navy suit, minimal makeup, hair pulled back. I wanted to look serious, credible, not like someone making wild accusations. Philip sat beside me at the table. Marcus was in the back of the room, observing. We'd agreed he wouldn't speak. This needed to be me, telling my story in my own words. At exactly 10 o'clock, I cleared my throat and began. "Thank you all for coming," I said, and was pleased that my voice sounded steady. "My name is Alia Hunt. 3 days ago, I learned that I'm the primary beneficiary of Lady Catherine Hunt's estate, approximately £28 million. Cameras flashed. Journalists wrote furiously in their notebooks. I'm here today to address the allegations from Richard Hunt and his family that I manipulated an elderly woman to steal their inheritance. But I'm also here to talk about something much more important." I paused, making eye contact with several journalists. 22 years ago, my parents, James and Sarah Mitchell, died in a house fire in Manchester. I was 5 years old. I survived. They didn't. I pulled out the first document and slid it across the table where cameras could see it. This is a business contract between my father and Richard Hunt. Richard owed my father £250,000. He refused to pay. My father threatened legal action. Another document. 3 weeks later, my parents' house burned down. The official investigation concluded it was an electrical fault. But this, I held up Walsh's report, is a private investigation commissioned by Lady Catherine Hunt. It found evidence of accelerant in 3 locations, evidence of arson. The room had gone absolutely silent. This, I continued, pulling out more documents, shows that Richard Hunt withdrew £50,000 in cash 1 week after the fire. And this shows that a man named Frank Morrison, a known arsonist, deposited £45,000 shortly after that. I looked directly at the cameras. I'm not here to defend my inheritance. I'm here to tell you that Richard Hunt murdered my parents, and I have evidence to prove it. The room exploded with questions. Do you have proof of a connection between Richard Hunt and Frank Morrison? Have you gone to the police with this evidence? What does Richard Hunt say about these allegations? I answered what I could, keeping my responses calm and factual. I showed them copies of the evidence, enough to prove I wasn't making wild accusations, not so much that I compromised the investigation I hoped would follow. After 30 minutes, Philip called an end to the conference. We left through a side door while journalists were still shouting questions. "That went well," Marcus said once we were safely in Philip's car. "Very well, actually. You came across as credible and sympathetic." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait. The police will have to respond. There's too much public interest for them to ignore it, and Richard will respond, probably with his own press conference denying everything." Marcus looked at me seriously. "The hard part is just beginning, Miss Hunt." He was right. By that evening, my press conference was all over the news. Heiress accuses adoptive father of murder. 28 pounds inheritance leads to shocking allegations. Cold case, did Richard Hunt kill to hide debt? My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists wanting interviews. Old acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly concerned about my well-being. 3 different podcasters asking if I wanted to tell my story in episode format. I ignored all of them. Richard's response came on Saturday. He held his own press conference, flanked by expensive lawyers in even more expensive suits. "These allegations are completely false," he said, his face a mask of wounded dignity. "They're a desperate attempt by Alia to justify manipulating my elderly mother into cutting her own family out of her will. My mother was not in her right mind during her final years. Alia took advantage of that, and now she's fabricating evidence to distract from her own misconduct." One of his lawyers added, "We have evidence that Alia Hunt visited Lady Catherine frequently during the last 2 years of her life, often when other family members were not present. We believe she used these visits to poison Lady Catherine against her own son and grandchildren with the explicit goal of inheriting the estate. It was a good strategy, I had to admit. Paint me as the villain. Make this about the inheritance, not about murder. But they'd made one mistake. We have evidence that Alia Hunt visited Lady Catherine frequently during the last 2 years of her life. I hadn't visited Lady Catherine in the last 2 years of her life. I'd barely seen her. But if Richard's lawyers were claiming I had, they must have some kind of false evidence, manufactured visitor logs, perhaps, or paid testimony from staff, which meant they were willing to commit fraud to win this fight, which meant they were scared. Marcus was delighted when I told him. "If they're fabricating evidence, we can prove it," he said. "Lady Catherine's household staff, her appointment books, security footage if her residences had cameras. We can build a timeline of your actual interactions with her and show that their claims are false." "They're going to fight dirty," I said. "Of course they are. Richard Hunt is facing a potential murder charge. He'll do whatever it takes to discredit you." Marcus smiled grimly. "But we expected this, and we're prepared." On Monday, I got a call from Detective Inspector Sarah Chen of the Metropolitan Police. She wanted to meet with me to discuss the allegations I'd made at the press conference. We met at a police station in central London. D.I. Chen was maybe 40, with short black hair and an expression that gave nothing away. She had a younger officer with her, D.C. James Porter, who took notes while she asked questions. I went through everything. The business deal, the debt, the fire, Lady Catherine's investigation. I showed them all the evidence I had copies of. D.I. Chen listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "This is compelling evidence," she said finally. "But you understand it's circumstantial. We have no direct proof that Richard Hunt hired Frank Morrison. No communication between them, no witnesses to any transaction." "Danny Morrison might testify that his father confessed to the job," I said. "Might. And even if he does, it's hearsay, a son repeating what his dead father allegedly told him. That's not strong evidence in court." D.I. Chen leaned forward. "I'm not saying we won't investigate, we will, but I want you to understand that proving a 22-year-old murder is extremely difficult, even with good evidence. And Richard Hunt can afford lawyers who will tear apart every piece of evidence we present. So you're saying he'll get away with it?" I felt anger rising in my chest. "I'm saying it won't be easy, but we'll do everything we can." She closed her notebook. "We're reopening the investigation into your parents' deaths. We'll interview witnesses, review the original fire investigation, try to establish a concrete connection between Richard Hunt and Frank Morrison. It'll take time, months probably, maybe longer." "I understand." "In the meantime," D.I. Chen said, her voice becoming slightly less official, "be careful, Miss Hunt. You've just publicly accused a powerful man of murder. If he's willing to kill to hide a debt, what might he do to protect himself now?" A chill ran down my spine. After I left the police station, I took extra precautions. I had new locks installed on my flat. I started parking my car in different locations each night. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, watching for anyone who might be following me. Maybe I was being paranoid, or maybe I was finally taking the threat seriously. The legal battle over Lady Catherine's will began in earnest. Richard and Vivienne had filed a formal challenge, claiming undue influence and diminished capacity. The case was assigned to the Chancery Division of the High Court. Philip and Marcus assembled a legal team. We had the medical assessments proving Lady Catherine was mentally competent. We had her letter explaining her reasoning. And we had something even better, video evidence. It turned out Lady Catherine had anticipated everything. A month before she died, she'd had her solicitor film her reading a statement explaining why she was leaving her estate to me. The video was devastating. Lady Catherine sat in her Chelsea townhouse, dressed elegantly, speaking directly to the camera with perfect clarity. I'm making this recording to explain my will so there can be no doubt about my intentions or my mental state. I am 89 years old. I have been examined by 3 doctors, Dr. Harrison, Dr. Patel, and Dr. Chen, all of whom confirm I am of sound mind. She looked directly into the camera. I'm leaving the bulk of my estate to Alia Hunt because she's the only member of my family who loves me for myself, not my money. Alia calls me just to talk. She sends me birthday cards with handwritten notes. She visits me when she's in London and never asks for anything in return. Lady Catherine's expression hardened. My son Richard has become a cold, calculating man who cares more about business than people. He treated Alia abominably when she was a child, and I won't reward that behavior. My granddaughter Vivienne is cruel and entitled. Oliver is weak. They don't deserve my fortune. She paused, then added, and there's another reason I'm leaving everything to Alia. A reason I can't speak about on this recording, but Alia will know, and she'll understand why justice matters more than blood. The video ended. When Richard's lawyers saw it during discovery, their case weakened considerably. You can argue someone was manipulated. You can argue they weren't thinking clearly. But you can't easily argue away a clear, articulate video statement. Still, they tried. They hired medical experts to review the video and look for signs of cognitive decline. They deposed Lady Catherine's household staff, trying to find evidence that I'd been manipulating her. They even hired a private investigator to dig into my background, looking for anything they could use to discredit me. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. I'd lived a quiet, honest life. No criminal record, no scandals, no secret addictions or affairs. Just a woman trying to make a living as an architect while dealing with a family that had never wanted her. The trial was scheduled for October, 5 months away. In the meantime, I was in a strange limbo. Technically, I had access to some of Lady Catherine's liquid assets, enough to live on comfortably while the estate was in probate. But the property, the investments, the shares in the company, all of that was frozen until the court made a decision. I moved out of my tiny Shoreditch flat and into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Bermondsey. Nothing extravagant, but it had a proper bedroom and a space I could use as a home office. After years of living in a studio where my bed was 3 feet from my kitchen, it felt like luxury. I also hired security. Marcus had insisted, and after D.I. Chen's warning, I agreed. A company called Sentinel Security provided a discreet security officer, a former police detective named Mike Crawford, who did regular checks on my apartment and accompanied me to any public events. It felt ridiculous at first. I wasn't a celebrity or a politician. I was just an architect caught up in a family drama. But then I started receiving the letters. The first one arrived at my new apartment in July. No return address, my name and address printed on a label. Inside was a single sheet of paper with words cut from magazines, like something from a bad thriller movie. Drop the ACCUSATIONS, or you'll regret IT. I showed it to Mike, who immediately reported it to the police. They opened an investigation, but without fingerprints or DNA or any identifying information, there wasn't much they could do. The second letter came a week later. Same format. Your PARENTS died in a fire. ACCIDNTS happen. That one made my hands shake. It wasn't just a threat, it was a direct reference to how my parents had died, which meant it almost certainly came from Richard or someone connected to him. Mike increased security after that. He installed cameras outside my apartment. He drove me to meetings and appointments. He taught me to vary my routes and be aware of my surroundings. Most of these threats are just attempts at intimidation, he said. People trying to scare you into backing down, but we take them seriously anyway. I appreciated his professionalism, even as I hated needing it. The third letter was the worst. It arrived in August, delivered to Philip's office instead of my home. Inside was a photograph of me walking down my street, taken from behind. Recent, based on the clothes I was wearing, I'd bought that jacket just 2 weeks ago. On the back, written in the same cutout magazine letters, "We're WCHING." That was when I realized this wasn't just about intimidation anymore. Someone was actually following me, watching me, taking pictures. D.I. Chen took the photograph seriously. "This crosses a line," she said. "This is stalking, potentially harassment. We'll increase patrols near your residence." "Do you think Richard sent it?" I asked. Honestly, probably not directly. He's too smart to do something that could be traced back to him, but he might have hired someone. She looked at me seriously. The question is whether you want to back down. No, I said immediately. Absolutely not. Then we keep going, but you need to be vigilant. Despite the threats, or maybe because of them, I pushed forward. The police investigation into my parents' deaths was progressing slowly. D.I. Chen's team had tracked down Danny Morrison, Frank's son, who agreed to testify that his father had confessed to the arson job before he died. They'd also found 2 other neighbors from my old street in Manchester who remembered seeing a black Mercedes near the house around the time of the fire. Between that and the financial records showing Richard's cash withdrawal and Frank's deposit, the case was building. But it still wasn't enough for criminal charges. Not yet. We need something more concrete, D.I. Chen told me in September. A direct link between Richard and Frank Morrison, some kind of communication, a witness who saw them together, anything that proves they had contact. What are the chances of finding that after 22 years? Slim, she admitted, but not impossible. We're still investigating. Meanwhile, the Will trial was approaching. Philip was confident we'd win. The evidence was too strong, Lady Catherine's video statement too clear. But Richard's lawyers were experienced and aggressive. They'd filed motion after motion, trying to delay the trial, trying to get certain evidence excluded, trying to find any angle that might help their case. Vivienne, I'd heard through the legal grapevine, was particularly bitter. She'd lost her position at her law firm. They'd quietly suggested she take a leave of absence given the negative publicity. Her engagement had been called off. She blamed all of it on me, of course. Oliver had been quieter. He hadn't participated in the public attacks on me, but he hadn't defended me either. He just disappeared from public view. I wondered sometimes what he thought about all of this. Did he believe Richard was innocent? Did he think I was lying? Or did some part of him suspect the truth? In late September, I got my answer. I was working from home, reviewing plans for a client's loft conversion when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I'd learned to be wary of unknown callers, but something made me pick up. Alia, Oliver's voice, quiet and strained. It's me, please don't hang up. I should have hung up. My lawyer would have told me not to speak to any of the Hunts without legal counsel present, but I was curious, so I said, "What do you want, Oliver?" "I need to talk to you. In person." "Alone, please, there's something you need to know." "About what?" "About Vivienne," he paused. "About what she knows." My heart started beating faster. What does she know? "Not over the phone. Please, Alia, meet me somewhere public. Bring security if you want. I need to tell you something important." I should have said no, but the desperation in his voice was real. "Tomorrow," I said. 2 p.m. that coffee shop in Notting Hill, you know, the one Lady Catherine used to take us to when we were kids. "I remember," Oliver said softly. "Thank you, Alia. Thank you for giving me a chance." He hung up. I immediately called Marcus and told him about the conversation. "It could be a trap," Marcus warned. "Getting you to say something incriminating, recording you, creating evidence for their case." "I know. That's why I'm bringing Mike. And I'm not saying anything that could hurt our case." "I'm just going to listen," Marcus sighed. "All right, but be careful. The Hunts are desperate, and desperate people do stupid things." The next day, Mike drove me to Notting Hill. The coffee shop was a small place called the Blue Door, tucked on a quiet side street. Lady Catherine used to bring us here on Saturday afternoons when we were children. She'd order tea and scones, and we'd sit in the window seats watching people walk by. Oliver was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table. He looked terrible, thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and the rumpled appearance of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. Mike positioned himself near the door where he could watch both the entrance and our table. I sat down across from Oliver. "Thank you for coming," Oliver said. His hands were wrapped around a coffee cup like he needed the warmth. "What did you want to tell me?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Oliver looked down at his cup. "I didn't know about the fire." "About Dad and your parents, I swear, Alia, I had no idea." "But," I prompted because there was clearly more, "but Vivienne did." The coffee shop seemed to go very quiet. "What?" I whispered. Oliver finally looked at me and his eyes were haunted. "She found out 5 years ago. She overheard Dad on the phone one night talking to someone about that bloody Mitchell fire. She confronted him later. He told her everything." I felt cold. "And she kept it secret?" "Worse." Oliver's voice cracked. "She used it to blackmail him. Dad had refused to fund her law firm, said she needed to make it on her own. So Vivienne threatened to go to the police unless he gave her £500,000. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Dad paid her," Oliver continued. And Vivienne used the money to start her practice. She's known for 5 years that Dad killed your parents, and she never said a word. She just used it for her own benefit. How do you know this? I managed to ask. Oliver pulled out his phone. Because I recorded them. 6 months ago, they had an argument at Ashworth Manor. I'd gone there to talk to Dad about some money issues I was having, and I heard them fighting, so I used my phone to record it. He turned the phone toward me. I can send this to you, or to your lawyer, or to the police, whatever you need. Why? I asked. Why are you doing this, turning on your own sister and father? Because it's wrong. Oliver's voice was barely audible. What Dad did was wrong. What Vivienne did was wrong. And what we all did to you your whole life, treating you like you didn't matter, like you were less than us, that was wrong too. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I was a coward, Alia. I stood by and watched them hurt you, and I never did anything to stop it. I told myself it wasn't my fault, that I was just staying neutral. But there's no such thing as neutral when someone's being hurt. I should have protected you. I should have spoken up. I'm so sorry. Part of me wanted to forgive him. The part that remembered being kids together, playing in the garden at Ashworth Manor before everything went wrong. The part that remembered Oliver as the quiet boy who'd sometimes sneak me biscuits when Vivienne wasn't looking. But another part of me, the stronger part, remembered every time he'd stood silently by while Vivienne made my life hell. Every time he'd pretended not to hear when Richard said something cruel. Every time he'd chosen his comfort over my dignity. I appreciate the apology, I said carefully, and I appreciate you coming forward with this evidence, but it doesn't change what happened. I know, Oliver said quickly. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I needed you to know the truth. About Vivienne, about me, about all of it. He transferred the audio file to my phone. Then he stood up, preparing to leave. Oliver, I said, and he stopped. Do you think Richard meant to kill them, my parents? He was quiet for a long moment. I think Dad is a man who always gets what he wants, no matter what it costs. And 22 years ago, what he wanted was to avoid paying that debt, whether he meant for them to die or just meant to destroy evidence. Oliver shook his head. Does it matter? They're dead either way. He left before I could respond. I sat there for a long time, staring at the audio file on my phone. Then I called Marcus. We need to meet, I said. Right now, I have something you need to hear. Marcus listened to Oliver's recording 3 times, his expression growing more serious with each replay. We were in his chambers at Gray's Inn, the afternoon sun slanting through the tall windows. Mike stood by the door, arms crossed, while Marcus paced the room with his phone in his hand. The recording was damning. Vivienne's voice came through clearly. I know what you did, Dad. I know about the Mitchell fire, about Frank Morrison. About the £50,000 you paid him to burn down their house. Richard's voice, slurred with alcohol. Keep your voice down, for God's sake. Why? No one else is here, just us, just family. A pause, then Vivienne again, colder now. I want £500,000 for my firm. Wire it by the end of the month. You're blackmailing me, your own father? I'm asking for an investment. Think of it as insurance. You help me, I keep quiet about your little problem. Everyone wins. You wouldn't go to the police, you're my daughter. A laugh, sharp and bitter. Try me. I've already contacted a journalist friend, gave them some hints about your past. One word from me and they start digging. Is that what you want? A long silence, then Richard's voice defeated. Fine, £500,000. But this is the last time, Vivienne, the absolute last time. Of course, Daddy, whatever you say. The recording ended. Marcus set down his phone and looked at me. This changes everything. Vivienne Hunt is now an accessory after the fact. She knowingly concealed evidence of a crime and used that knowledge for personal gain. That's a serious criminal offense. Can we use this? I asked. Is it admissible? Oliver recorded them without their knowledge. In England, it's legal to record a conversation you're part of without the other person's consent, but Oliver wasn't part of this conversation. He was eavesdropping. Marcus considered. However, the recording can still be used to establish probable cause for further investigation. We turn this over to D.I. Chen. She can use it to obtain warrants, interview Vivienne, apply pressure. What about Richard? Does this prove he killed my parents? It's close. It's the closest we've gotten to a confession. Combined with the financial evidence, the witness statements, Danny Morrison's testimony about his father. Yes, I think we have enough now for the CPS to consider charges. Marcus called D.I. Chen immediately. She arrived at his chambers within the hour, bringing D.C. Porter with her. They listened to the recording in silence. Where did you get this? D.I. Chen asked when it finished. Oliver Hunt, I said. Richard's son. He recorded his sister and father 6 months ago. And he's willing to testify to that? He said I could use it however I needed. I have his contact information. Di Chen exchanged a look with DC Porter. This is good. This is very good. Vivienne Hunt admitting she knew about the fire, about Morrison, about the payment, that corroborates everything else we've found. Can you arrest them? I asked. We need to move carefully. Richard Hunt has resources and connections. If we arrest him and the case falls apart, we won't get a second chance. Di Chen stood up, pacing. But yes, I think we have enough now. Let me speak with the CPS, get their approval. If they agree we have a case, we'll bring Richard in for questioning. And Vivienne, how long? Marcus asked. Few days, maybe a week. We need to prepare properly, make sure everything is bulletproof. Di Chen looked at me. Miss Hunt, I need you to be ready. Once we arrest Richard, this is going to explode in the media. It'll be everywhere. Your name, your face, your history. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my parents. About justice delayed for 22 years. About the little girl I'd been, standing in a funeral home in a dress that was too big, not understanding why Mummy and Daddy weren't coming back. Yes, I said. I'm ready. Di Chen kept her word. 4 days later, on a Thursday morning in early October, I got a call from her. We're bringing Richard Hunt in this morning, she said. Wanted you to know before you see it on the news. We'll be arresting Vivienne as well. My hands started shaking. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for not giving up, Di Chen replied. Not many people would have fought this hard for this long. Your parents would be proud. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment and cried. Not sad tears, something else. Relief maybe, or vindication, or just the release of carrying this weight for months. Mike made me tea, which I barely touched. Marcus called to check on me. Philip sent a formal email confirming he'd heard the news and congratulating me on the breakthrough. I turned on the BBC at noon and watched the breaking news banner scroll across the screen. Property developer Richard Hunt arrested on suspicion of murder. The newsreader's voice was grave. London property developer Richard Hunt, 50, has been arrested in connection with a 2001 house fire that killed 2 people in Manchester. Mr. Hunt's daughter, Vivienne Hunt, 33, has also been arrested on suspicion of perverting the course of justice. The arrests come after months of investigation following allegations made by Alia Hunt, Mr. Hunt's adopted daughter. They showed footage of Richard being led from his Belgravia townhouse in handcuffs, his face gray and haggard. Vivienne being escorted from her Chelsea flat, her expression one of outrage and disbelief. My phone exploded with notifications. News outlets wanting comments. Old acquaintances reaching out. Strangers on social media praising me or condemning me, depending on their perspective. I turned off my phone and sat in silence, watching the news coverage cycle through the same footage over and over. It was really happening. Richard and Vivienne were questioned for 2 days before being formally charged. Richard faced 2 counts of manslaughter. The CPS decided they couldn't prove intent to kill, only intent to destroy property, 1 count of arson, and 1 count of perverting the course of justice for the cover-up that followed. Vivienne was charged with perverting the course of justice and blackmail. Both were released on bail. Richard's was set at £500,000, Vivienne's at £100,000, with conditions including surrendering their passports and reporting regularly to police. The media frenzy was overwhelming. My face was everywhere. Journalists camped outside my apartment building until the property manager threatened them with trespassing charges. I had to hire a PR consultant just to manage the constant requests for interviews. Some coverage was sympathetic. Adopted daughter seeks justice for parents after 22 years. Other coverage was skeptical. £28 inheritance, justice, or revenge. And some was outright hostile. Foster child destroys family who took her in. I tried not to read any of it. Marcus had advised me to stay off social media, avoid news coverage, focus on the legal case rather than public opinion. It was good advice. I mostly followed it. The trial for Lady Catherine's will took place in mid-October, 2 weeks after Richard and Vivienne's arrests. Given the criminal charges, Richard's lawyers had tried to delay the civil trial, arguing that the criminal case prejudiced the civil matter. The judge denied their motion. We gathered in Court 32 of the Royal Courts of Justice on the Strand, a grand Victorian building that looked like a Gothic castle. The courtroom itself was all dark wood and high ceilings, intimidating in its formality. Richard sat with his legal team on one side. Vivienne wasn't there. Her lawyers had advised her not to attend given her criminal charges. Oliver sat in the public gallery, alone, not speaking to his father. I sat with Philip and Marcus, wearing my navy suit again, hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. The trial lasted 3 days. Richard's lawyers argued that Lady Catherine had been mentally incompetent when she changed her will, that I had manipulated her through frequent visits and emotional manipulation, that the will should be set aside in favor of an earlier version that divided the estate among Richard and his children. We countered with the video of Lady Catherine explaining her decision in clear, articulate terms. We presented the medical assessments from 3 separate doctors. We brought in Lady Catherine's household staff, who testified that I'd rarely visited in her final years. In fact, I'd visited less than any other family member. We showed phone records proving that Lady Catherine had called me more often than I'd called her. We presented the cards and letters I'd sent, simple, affectionate messages with no mention of money or inheritance. And we played a recording that even I hadn't known existed until Philip revealed it in court. A phone conversation between Lady Catherine and her solicitor, recorded just 6 weeks before she died. "I'm sure they'll contest the will," Lady Catherine's voice said, still strong despite her age. "Richard will claim I wasn't of sound mind. Vivienne will accuse Alia of manipulation. But I know exactly what I'm doing, Philip. I'm leaving my estate to the one person in my family who has a conscience, who has empathy, who deserves a chance to do something good with money that would otherwise be wasted on selfishness and vanity." Richard's face was stone as the recording played. On the 3rd day, the judge, a stern woman named Justice Blackwell, delivered her ruling. "Having reviewed all the evidence," she said, reading from her notes, "I find that Lady Catherine Hunt was entirely competent when she executed her will. The medical evidence is unequivocal. Her video statement demonstrates clear understanding of her decisions, and the testimony from household staff contradicts claims that Miss Hunt unduly influenced her." She looked up, directly at Richard. "Furthermore, I find the claims of frequent visits and manipulation to be unsupported by evidence and, in some cases, contradicted by phone records and witness testimony. It appears that counsel for the contestors fabricated or exaggerated certain facts in an attempt to discredit Miss Hunt." Richard's lead lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "The will is valid," Justice Blackwell concluded. "Miss Alia Hunt is the rightful beneficiary of Lady Catherine Hunt's estate. The contestors' challenge is dismissed, costs to be paid by the contestors." The gavel came down. I'd won. Philip squeezed my arm. "Congratulations, Miss Hunt, it's done." Richard stood and walked out without looking at me. His lawyers gathered their papers in silence. Oliver caught my eye from the public gallery. He gave me a small nod, not quite approval but acknowledgement. Then he left too. Outside the courthouse, journalists swarmed. Marcus gave a brief statement on my behalf, saying we were pleased with the outcome and looked forward to honoring Lady Catherine's wishes. I said nothing, just let Mike escort me to the car through the crowd of cameras and shouted questions. Back at my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, looking out at the London skyline. I was now worth £28 million. Hunt Manor was mine, the investment portfolio was mine. The shares in Hunt Properties were mine, 40%, giving me effective control since the remaining 60% was split between various shareholders. I could do anything, go anywhere, buy anything, and all I felt was tired. The criminal trial was set for January. 3 months away. Richard had tried to get bail conditions changed so he could travel, claiming business needs. The judge had refused, noting the seriousness of the charges and the risk of flight. Vivienne had been quieter. Her legal team was negotiating with the CPS, trying to arrange a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Richard. I didn't know if she'd take it. Part of me hoped she would. Her testimony would seal Richard's conviction. But another part of me wanted her to face the full consequences of her choices. In November, I made my first major decision about the inheritance. I didn't want Hunt Manor. The house was beautiful, yes, but it held too many bad memories. Too many Christmas dinners where I'd sat at the end of the table. Too many summers playing in the garden while Vivienne and Oliver were taken to France or Italy, and I was told we couldn't afford to take me along. So I sold it. A developer bought it for £4.5 million, more than its valuation, because they wanted the land for a luxury housing development. The sale took 6 weeks to complete. With that money, plus a significant portion of the liquid assets, I established the James and Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Orphan Children. The foundation's mission was simple: to help children who'd lost their parents and ended up in difficult situations. We provided funding for education, therapy, legal assistance when foster families were abusive or neglectful, and grants for young adults aging out of the system. I hired a team to run it, people who'd worked in child welfare, who understood the system, who genuinely cared. And I threw myself into the work, reviewing applications, meeting with kids, making sure every pound was spent properly. It felt right. It felt like something my parents would have approved of. I kept the shares in Hunt Properties, not because I wanted to be involved in the business, but because I wanted to ensure Richard couldn't just resume control if he somehow beat the charges. I appointed an independent board member as interim CEO, someone with no connection to the Hunt family, and instructed them to run the company ethically and transparently. Richard was furious, according to the Business News. He tried to call an extraordinary general meeting to vote me out, but with 40% of shares plus support from other minority shareholders who were concerned about the criminal charges, I blocked it. Vivienne's law firm officially dissolved. Her partners wanted nothing to do with someone facing criminal charges, especially charges that made her look like a blackmailer who'd covered up a murder for money. She moved to a small flat in Hounslow, working as a legal consultant for a minor firm that probably hired her more for the notoriety than her skills. I saw a photo of her once, getting into a battered car, looking exhausted and angry. I felt no satisfaction, just a hollow acknowledgement that consequences were finally catching up with her. Oliver reached out again in December. An email this time, brief and careful. "Alia, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I understand. But I wanted you to know that I'm testifying at Dad's trial. The prosecution has called me as a witness about the recording. I'm going to tell the truth about everything I know. It's the least I can do. I've left the family business, started working at a homeless charity in Southwark. It doesn't pay much, but it feels more honest than anything I've done before. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. Oliver, I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. Maybe I never would be, but I did keep the email." The trial began on January 10th in the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, the crown jewel of British criminal courts, where the most serious cases were tried. Richard was charged with 2 counts of manslaughter, arson, and perverting the course of justice. Vivienne had indeed taken a plea deal. She'd agreed to testify against Richard in exchange for a reduced sentence. She'd plead guilty to perverting the course of justice, but the blackmail charges were dropped. I attended every day of the trial. Marcus advised against it. "You don't need to put yourself through this," he said, but I wanted to be there. I needed to see it through. The prosecution was led by a Queen's Counsel named Eleanor Hartley, a formidable woman in her 50s with a reputation for thorough preparation and devastating cross-examinations. She laid out the case methodically. The business dispute between Richard and my father, the unpaid debt, the threats of legal action, the fire that happened 3 weeks later, the evidence of accelerant, the financial transactions linking Richard to Frank Morrison, Danny Morrison's testimony that his father had confessed to the arson job before he died, and then, the centerpiece, Vivienne's testimony. She took the stand on the 4th day, looking pale and thin in a conservative black suit. She'd lost weight since her arrest. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked diminished, small. Eleanor Hartley walked her through the testimony with clinical precision. "Miss Hunt, did you overhear a conversation between your father and an unknown person in March of this year?" "Yes." "And what did you hear?" Vivienne's voice was barely audible. "I heard Dad talking about a fire, the Mitchell fire. He was telling someone that it had been handled years ago." "What did you understand that to mean?" "I understood that he was talking about Alia's parents, about their house fire." "Did you confront your father about this conversation?" "Yes, later that night." "And what did he tell you?" Vivienne looked down at her hands. "He told me that he'd hired someone to burn down James Mitchell's house, to destroy evidence of the debt. He said it was supposed to be empty, that he'd checked and thought the family was away, but they came home early." The courtroom was silent. "Did your father express remorse for the deaths of James and Sarah Mitchell?" He said it was an accident, that he never meant for anyone to die, but he also said he couldn't change what happened, so there was no point dwelling on it." "And what did you do with this information, Miss Hunt?" Vivienne's voice dropped even lower. "I used it to get money from him. I told him I'd go to the police unless he funded my law firm. He gave me £500,000. "So you used your knowledge of a double manslaughter to blackmail your father?" "Yes." Tears started running down Vivienne's face. "Yes, I did. I know it was wrong. I know I should have gone to the police immediately, but I didn't. I took the money and I kept quiet. Richard's lawyer cross-examined her aggressively, trying to establish that she was lying to save herself, that the plea deal gave her incentive to fabricate testimony. But Vivienne held up surprisingly well. She admitted her guilt freely. She didn't try to make excuses, and most importantly, Oliver's recording backed up every word she said. Oliver testified on day 6. He was nervous, stumbling over some of his words, but he was clear about what he'd heard and why he'd recorded it. Richard's lawyer tried to paint him as a disloyal son trying to curry favor with me, the new wealthy member of the family, but Oliver shut that down quickly. "I'm not doing this for money," he said firmly. "I'm doing it because it's the truth. Because Alia deserves justice, and because I'm tired of living in a family built on lies." Danny Morrison testified about his father's deathbed confession. Walsh, the private investigator, walked through his findings. The neighbors from Manchester described the black Mercedes. A financial forensic accountant explained the money trail. By the time the prosecution rested, the case against Richard was overwhelming. Richard's defense was predictable. He denied everything. His lawyers argued the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no direct proof he'd hired Morrison, that the financial transactions could have innocent explanations, that Vivienne was lying to save herself. Richard himself took the stand. Against his lawyer's advice, I later learned. He was calm, dignified, insistent on his innocence. "I never met Frank Morrison," he said. "I had no knowledge of any arson. The timing of that cash withdrawal was coincidence. I was paying contractors in cash for renovation work on a property I owned. I have nothing to do with the Mitchell fire." But Alina heartily destroyed him on cross-examination. She walked him through the business deal with my father, making him admit to the debt. She showed him the letters from James's solicitor, made him admit he'd ignored them. She presented bank records showing he'd never paid contractors in cash before or since that £150,000 withdrawal. And then she played Oliver's recording. Richard's own voice, admitting to the fire, admitting to Morrison, admitting that it was supposed to be empty. "That's taken out of context," Richard stammered. "I was drunk, my daughter was manipulating me. So you did say these things?" Alina interrupted. It's not what it sounds like. Did you or did you not tell your daughter Vivienne that you'd hired someone to burn down the Mitchell house?" "I never said." "We just heard you say exactly that, Mr. Hunt, on a recording made by your own son. Are you claiming that recording is fabricated?" Richard had no good answer. He stumbled through a few more questions before his lawyer requested a break. The trial lasted 3 weeks. By the end, I was exhausted. Every day sitting in that courtroom, listening to the details of my parents' deaths, watching Richard try to lie his way out of what he'd done, it was draining in a way I hadn't anticipated. But I didn't miss a single day. On February 2nd, the jury retired to deliberate. They were out for 2 days. When they returned, the foreman stood and faced the judge. "On the charge of manslaughter in the death of James Mitchell, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." "On the charge of manslaughter in the death of Sarah Mitchell, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." "On the charge of arson with intent to endanger life?" "Guilty." "On the charge of perverting the course of justice?" "Guilty." Guilty on all counts. Richard's face went white. He gripped the edge of the dock, swaying slightly. Behind me, someone gasped. I turned and saw Oliver, his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Justice Pemberton, the judge presiding over the trial, set sentencing for 1 week later. That week was surreal. The media coverage was constant. Legal experts debated the case on television. Some praised the conviction as long overdue justice. Others questioned whether the evidence was really strong enough, whether Vivienne's testimony could be trusted. I ignored most of it. On February 9th, I returned to the Old Bailey for sentencing. Justice Pemberton was thorough. He reviewed the case, the evidence, the impact on the victim's family. Then he turned to Richard. "Richard Michael Hunt, you have been found guilty of 2 counts of manslaughter, 1 count of arson with intent to endanger life, and 1 count of perverting the course of justice. These are serious crimes. You took 2 lives because you didn't want to pay a legitimate debt. You destroyed a family. And then you spent 22 years evading justice, allowing an innocent child to grow up without her parents." Richard stood still, hands clasped in front of him. The sentencing guidelines for manslaughter are complex, depending on culpability and harm. In this case, I find high culpability. You deliberately set this chain of events in motion. The harm was catastrophic. 2 people died. A child was orphaned. Taking into account the arson charge and the perversion of justice, I sentence you to 22 years imprisonment. A murmur went through the courtroom. You will serve a minimum of 18 years before being eligible for parole. Take him down." Richard was led away. He didn't look at me, didn't look at Oliver, just stared straight ahead as the guards escorted him from the courtroom. 22 years, 1 year for every year I'd lived not knowing the truth. It felt right. Vivienne was sentenced the following week. With her plea deal and cooperation, she received 6 years. She'd likely serve 4 with good behavior. As she was led away, she finally looked at me. Our eyes met across the courtroom. I couldn't read her expression. Hatred? Regret? Resignation? I didn't care anymore. 3 months after Richard's sentencing, I stood in the main hall of what used to be Hunt Manor. The developers had kept their promise. Instead of tearing down the historic building to make room for luxury flats, they'd converted it into something else entirely, something I'd negotiated as part of the sale. The manor was now the Mitchell House Children's Center. The grand entrance hall, where I'd stood that terrible birthday night, now served as a welcoming reception area. The conservatory where Vivienne had mocked me was now a bright, plant-filled therapy space. The dining room where I'd been told I wasn't real family was now a communal area where children could eat meals together, where no one was ever made to feel less than. We'd opened our doors 2 weeks ago. Already we had 15 children living here, kids from difficult foster situations, kids aging out of the system who had nowhere else to go, kids who just needed a safe place while social services figured out their next steps. "Miss Hunt," a voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see Anna Okonkwo, the center's director. She was a warm, competent woman in her 40s who'd spent 20 years in child welfare. "The Manchester delegation is here for the library opening. Are you ready?" The library? Right. I'd spent the last 3 months working with Manchester City Council on another project, using some of the inheritance to fund a new public library in the neighborhood where my parents had died. The old library had closed years ago due to budget cuts. The new one would be state-of-the-art, with computers, study spaces, programs for children, and it would be called the James and Sarah Mitchell Library. The opening ceremony was today. I'd driven up from London this morning, my stomach in knots the entire way. I hadn't been back to Manchester since I was 5 years old. "I'm ready," I told Anna, though I wasn't sure that was true. The library was beautiful. Modern glass and steel architecture, my design, actually. It had felt right to design this building myself, to put my architectural training to use honoring my parents. The interior was warm and inviting, with natural light flooding through large windows, comfortable reading nooks, and a children's section painted in cheerful colors. A small crowd had gathered for the opening, local councilors, community members, some press. And standing near the front, looking uncomfortable in a suit, was Oliver. I hadn't expected him to come. We'd barely spoken since the trial ended. Just a few brief emails about his testimony, a short message from him congratulating me on the Mitchell House opening. But here he was. The ceremony was lovely. The council leader gave a speech about community and literacy. A local teacher talked about how much the neighborhood needed this resource. And then it was my turn. I stood at the podium, looking out at the faces in front of me. Behind them, through the library's glass walls, I could see the Manchester skyline. Somewhere out there, not far from here, was the street where I'd lived with my parents, where our house had stood before it burned. I'd driven past it this morning before coming to the library. There was a different house there now, built 10 years ago. No trace remained of what had happened. "I don't remember much about my parents," I began, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet space. "I was only 5 when they died, but I remember my mother reading to me. Every night before bed, she'd pick a book from our shelf and we'd read together. Sometimes adventure stories, sometimes fairy tales, sometimes just picture books about animals or trucks or whatever had caught my interest that day." I paused, collecting myself. My father was an architect. He designed buildings that would become homes, places where families would make memories. He believed that good design could improve people's lives, that spaces mattered. I think he'd be proud to know that his daughter followed in his footsteps, and I know he'd be proud of this building, a space dedicated to learning, to community, to giving everyone access to knowledge regardless of their circumstances. I looked down at my notes, then decided to speak without them. For 22 years, I didn't know the truth about how my parents died. I thought it was an accident, a random tragedy. When I learned what really happened, that they were killed deliberately, I was angry. So angry. I wanted revenge. I wanted the person responsible to suffer the way I'd suffered. The crowd was absolutely silent. But revenge isn't really satisfying. Watching Richard Hunt get sentenced didn't bring my parents back. Watching Vivienne lose everything didn't heal the years of hurt she caused me. Justice was necessary, essential, even, but it didn't make me whole. I gestured to the library around us. This makes me whole. This building, named for two good people who died too young. The Mitchell House Children's Center, helping kids who need it. The foundation we've established. These things honor my parents in ways that revenge never could. They take something terrible and create something good. I looked directly at the cameras. My parents were killed because someone valued money more than human life. I could have used my inheritance, which came to me because of their deaths, because of those choices, to live extravagantly, to hoard wealth, to prove I was better than the people who hurt me. Instead, I'm trying to do what I think my parents would have done, use resources to help others, to build things that matter, to make the world slightly better than we found it. My voice cracked slightly. I hope they'd be proud. I hope wherever they are, they know that their deaths weren't meaningless, that their daughter survived and grew up and tried to be worthy of their love. I stepped back from the podium. The applause was warm, genuine. Afterwards, as I cut the ribbon to officially open the library, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not happiness, exactly. My parents were still dead. Richard was in prison, but that didn't undo what he'd done. Vivienne was serving time, but our relationship was destroyed beyond repair. But I had peace. The kind that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, from creating something meaningful from tragedy, from honoring the people you've lost in the best way you know how. Oliver found me an hour later, after the ceremony had ended and most of the crowd had dispersed. I was standing in the children's section, running my hand along the bookshelf, thinking about my mother. "Alia," he said softly, "do you have a moment?" I turned to face him. He looked better than he had during the trial, less haggard, more settled, like he'd found some equilibrium. "Hello, Oliver. The library is beautiful, really beautiful. Your parents would have loved it." "Thank you." We stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Oliver said, "I wanted to tell you something. I'm moving to Manchester. I got a job with a homeless charity here, starting next month." I was surprised. "Why Manchester?" "Because London has too many ghosts, too many reminders of who I used to be." He looked around the library. "Here I can start fresh, do work that actually matters, try to be better than I was." "That's good, Oliver, I'm glad." "I also wanted to say," he paused, struggling with the words, "I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I'm sorry, truly, deeply sorry, for every time I stood by and said nothing, for every time I chose my comfort over your dignity, for being a coward when you needed someone to stand up for you." I looked at this man who'd been my brother in name only. This person who'd watched me suffer and done nothing. Who'd finally found his conscience when it was almost too late. Part of me wanted to tell him it was fine, to absolve him, to pretend the past didn't matter. That was the easy thing, the comfortable thing, but I'd spent too many years making myself small and comfortable for other people. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully, "and I appreciate that you finally did the right thing even though it cost you, but I can't forgive you, not yet, maybe not ever." Oliver nodded slowly. "I understand. You stood by while Vivienne tormented me for years. You never once defended me. You pretended I didn't exist because it was easier than acknowledging what your family was doing to me." My voice was steady, not angry, just honest. "You only came forward when you had evidence about Richard. Where were you the 100 other times I needed someone to speak up?" "I know, you're right. I don't hate you, Oliver. I actually hope you build a good life here in Manchester. I hope you do meaningful work and become the person you should have been all along. But we're not family, we're not friends, we're just two people who used to live in the same house." Oliver's eyes were wet, but he nodded. "That's fair, that's more than fair." He took a step back. "I won't bother you again, Alia, but if you ever need anything at all, please know you can ask. I owe you that much at least." "Goodbye, Oliver. Goodbye." He walked away and I watched him go. I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet acknowledgement that some relationships couldn't be repaired, that some hurts went too deep, and that it was okay to accept that reality rather than forcing forgiveness I didn't feel. I stayed in Manchester for 3 days, visiting the library, checking on some other foundation projects in the area, and finally, on my last day, visiting my parents' graves. They were buried in a cemetery on the outskirts of the city, in a quiet section with old oak trees providing shade. I'd been here once before, right after Lady Catherine died, but I'd been too raw then, too overwhelmed with everything I'd learned. Now I could stand here calmly and look at the simple headstone. James Mitchell 1968-2001 beloved husband and father. Sarah Mitchell 1972-001 beloved wife and mother, forever in our hearts. Someone Probably my maternal grandmother, who died herself 5 years ago, had planted roses around the grave. They were blooming now, deep red against the green grass. I knelt down and placed my hand on the cool stone. "Hi, Mum. Hi, Dad," I said softly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come back. I'm sorry I didn't know what really happened to you, but I know now, and the person who did it is in prison. Justice came late, but it came." A breeze rustled through the oak leaves above me. "I hope you'd be proud of me. I became an architect like you, Dad. I design spaces where people can feel safe and happy, and I'm using the money Lady Catherine left me to help kids who need it. Kids like I was alone and scared and needing someone to believe in them." I traced my fingers over their names carved in stone. "I wish I remembered you better. I wish I had more than fragments," Mum's laugh, Dad's hands showing me how to draw, "but I'm grateful for what I do remember. You loved me. Even though I only had you for 5 years, you loved me completely. That's more than a lot of people ever get." I sat there for a long time, until the sun started to set and the cemetery grew quiet. "I'm going to be okay," I told them finally. "Better than okay, actually. I'm going to build a good life. I'm going to help people. I'm going to honor you the best way I know how." I kissed my fingers and pressed them to the headstone. Then I stood up, brushed off my knees, and walked back to my car. The drive back to London took 4 hours. I listened to music and podcasts and nothing at all, watching the countryside roll past, thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. 1 year ago, I'd been struggling to pay rent, taking whatever architectural projects I could get, living in a tiny studio flat and telling myself I was content with my small, independent life. Now I had more money than I could spend in a lifetime. I had a foundation helping hundreds of children. I had the satisfaction of knowing my parents' killer was in prison. I had the respect that comes from fighting for justice and winning. But I'd also lost any illusion that the Hunt family had ever been my family. I'd lost my innocence about human nature, about how people could know about murder and stay silent, could watch a child suffer and do nothing, could value money and status over basic decency. I'd gained wealth but lost the family I'd once desperately wanted to belong to. On balance, I'd take the wealth. Back in London, life slowly found a new rhythm. I continued my architectural practice, but more selectively now. I only took projects that interested me: community centers, affordable housing, public spaces. Things that improved people's lives rather than just making wealthy clients wealthier. The foundation grew. By the end of the year, we were helping over 600 children annually. We'd opened a second facility in Birmingham, with plans for a third in Liverpool. We provided scholarships, therapy, legal assistance, and emergency housing. We made sure no child fell through the cracks the way I almost had. I bought a house in Highgate, nothing too grand, just a comfortable Victorian terrace with a garden and a studio space where I could work. It was mine, truly mine. Bought with money that Lady Catherine had left me because she loved me, not because I'd manipulated her. I decorated it slowly, carefully, choosing pieces that felt right rather than trying to impress anyone. Books on every wall, art from local galleries. Comfortable furniture. A kitchen where I could cook real meals instead of eating takeaway every night. A guest room for the few friends I had. It was a home. The first real home I'd had since my parents died. I visited Lady Catherine's grave regularly. She was buried in the churchyard near Ashworth Manor, under an old yew tree. I'd bring flowers and tell her about the foundation, about the children we were helping, about the good being done with her money. "You were right," I told her one autumn afternoon, sitting on a bench near her grave. "About everything. About Richard, about justice, about using money for good rather than hoarding it. I hope you're resting easy, Grandmother Catherine. I hope you know how much you mattered to me." I never got a response, of course, but the wind in the yew branches sounded almost like laughter. Richard wrote to me from prison. The first letter arrived 6 months after his sentencing. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. It was 5 pages, handwritten in Richard's precise script. "Dear Alia," it began, "I don't expect you to respond to this letter. I don't expect anything from you at all, but I needed to write it anyway, even if only for myself. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to your parents. I'm sorry for taking you in afterward, not out of love but out of guilt and fear. I'm sorry for every time I made you feel unwanted, for every slight and neglect, for every moment you felt like you didn't belong. I've had a lot of time to think in here, about choices, about consequences, about the kind of man I became. I never meant for your parents to die. That's not an excuse. I know, I never meant to, doesn't undo murder. But it's the truth. I hired Morrison to burn the house when I thought it would be empty. I just wanted to destroy the contracts, the evidence of my debt. When I heard that James and Sarah had died, that you'd barely survived, I was horrified. But I was also relieved. Because with them gone, there was no one to pursue the debt. No one to take me to court. No one to destroy the business I was building. That relief is the thing I'm most ashamed of. That in my horror and guilt, there was also relief. I adopted you because Margaret pushed for it, because it seemed like the right thing to do, because some part of me thought it would atone for what I'd done. But I couldn't look at you without seeing them, without remembering. And I hated you for that, hated you for being a living reminder of my worst act. That hate is what I'm second most ashamed of. You were an innocent child. You'd lost everything. And instead of giving you the love and security you deserved, I gave you scraps. I let my children treat you poorly. I made you feel like a charity case rather than a daughter. When Margaret died, I lost the one person who'd insisted on treating you with kindness. After that, it was easier to just let you drift to the margins of the family. To pretend you were temporary, not really ours, not really my responsibility. I know you won't forgive me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know, none of it was your fault. You deserved better. You deserved everything. My mother saw that. Lady Catherine understood what I couldn't, that you were special, that you'd survived trauma and remained kind, that you deserved the world. That's why she left you everything. Not to punish me, though I'm sure that was part of it, but because you earned it. Because you were the person she hoped her family would be, and we failed. I'll die in here, Alia. I'm 52 years old and I have an 18-year minimum sentence. Even if I make parole, I'll be 70. My health isn't good. Prison isn't kind to men like me, but maybe that's justice. 22 years for 22 years. You grew up without parents because of me. Now I'll grow old without freedom because of my choices. I hope you're happy. I hope you're using mother's money to do good things. I hope you're building the life you should have had all along. And I hope, someday, you can think about your childhood and remember that at least Lady Catherine loved you. That at least one person in that house saw your worth. I'm sorry, Alia. For all of it, Richard, I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully, put it in a drawer, and never responded. Some apologies don't deserve acknowledgement. Some wrongs are too deep to address with words. Richard was sorry, I believed that. But his sorrow didn't undo what he'd done. It didn't give me back my parents or my childhood. He'd have to live with his guilt. I wasn't going to absolve him of it. Vivienne wrote to me too, about a year into her sentence. Her letter was shorter, angrier. You destroyed our family, she wrote. You came into our lives and took everything. Our mother's attention when we were children, our grandmother's affection, our inheritance, our father, everything. I hope you're happy now. I hope it was worth it seeing Dad in prison, seeing me lose everything I'd built, watching Oliver fall apart. We raised you. We gave you a home when you had nothing. And this is how you repay us. I'll be out in 3 years. Don't think this is over. I threw that letter away immediately. Vivienne still didn't understand. After everything, she still saw herself as the victim. Still believed that taking in an orphaned 5-year-old entitled her family to treat that child however they wanted. Still thought I owed them gratitude for the scraps they'd thrown me. She'd serve her time and get out. She'd rebuild some version of a life, but we'd never speak again. I was certain of that. 2 years after Lady Catherine's death, the foundation hit a major milestone. We'd helped our 1,000th child. Her name was Sophie. She was 7 years old, had been in 4 different foster homes in 3 years, and was starting to believe that no one would ever keep her. We placed her with a carefully vetted family in Bristol, people who'd been through our intensive training program, who understood trauma, who were committed to providing stability. We funded therapy for Sophie. We provided educational support. We made sure she had everything she needed to heal and thrive. 6 months later, I got a letter from Sophie's new foster mother. It included a drawing Sophie had made, a house with a family standing in front of it, all holding hands, all smiling. At the bottom, in wobbly 7-year-old handwriting, "Thank you for my new family. Love, Sophie." I cried when I read it. Good tears for once. Tears of gratitude that something good had come from all the pain, that another little girl wouldn't grow up feeling unwanted and alone. This was what the inheritance was for. Not revenge. Not proving I was better than the Hunts. But this, helping children who needed it, making sure Sophie and kids like her had chances I'd never gotten. On the 3rd anniversary of Lady Catherine's death, I organized a memorial service. It was small, just the household staff who'd worked for her, a few of her old business associates who genuinely liked her, Philip and Marcus and me. Oliver sent flowers but didn't attend. Richard was in prison. Vivienne was newly released but not invited. We gathered at the churchyard where she was buried. I'd commissioned a new headstone, something grander than the simple marker that had been there before. Cathiranor Eleanor Hunt 1929-022 beloved matriarch, successful entrepreneur, champion of justice. She saw clearly and loved fiercely. Underneath was inscribed, Founders benefactor of the James and Sarah Mitchell Foundation. I gave a short speech about what Lady Catherine had meant to me, about how she'd been the only person in the Hunt family to treat me with genuine kindness, about how her final gift had allowed me to seek justice and help others. She could have left her fortune to her son and grandchildren, I said to the small gathering. It would have been easier, more conventional. No one would have questioned it, but Lady Catherine wasn't interested in easy or conventional. She was interested in right, in justice, in rewarding character over blood. I looked at her headstone. I hope I'm honoring her legacy. I hope the foundation makes her proud. I hope she's at peace, knowing the truth came out and that her money is being used exactly as she intended, to build something good to help people who need it, to create light from darkness. After the service, Philip pulled me aside. Lady Catherine would be incredibly proud of you, he said. Not just for the foundation or the justice you sought, but for the person you've become. You could have used that money selfishly. You could have spent years bitter and angry. Instead, you've created something meaningful. That takes strength. She gave me the tools, I said. The evidence, the resources, the belief that I deserved better, I just used them. You did more than that. You transformed them into something she never could have imagined. Philip smiled. That's not just using tools, that's building a legacy. Life continued. Seasons changed. The foundation grew. I took on interesting architectural projects. A community center in Brixton, a shelter for homeless youth in Edinburgh, a public park in Cardiff. I traveled. I made new friends who knew nothing about my past and liked me for who I was now, not where I'd come from. I dated occasionally, though nothing serious. It was hard to trust people, hard to let anyone get close after everything I'd been through, but I was working on it. Therapy helped. Time helped. Building a life that felt genuinely mine helped. 5 years after Lady Catherine's death, I received an email from Oliver. Dear Alia, I hope this message finds you well. I know you said we're not family, and I respect that, but I wanted to update you on something. Dad died last week. Heart attack in prison. He was 57. I thought you should know, even though I'm not sure how you'll feel about it. The funeral is next Thursday, but I don't expect you to attend. I probably wouldn't in your position. I've been in Manchester for 5 years now. The work is good, challenging but meaningful. I think I'm becoming a better person, though that's probably for others to judge, not me. I hope you're doing well. I hope the foundation is thriving. I hope you found peace. With respect, Oliver, I stared at the email for a long time. Richard was dead. I felt nothing. No relief, no grief, no satisfaction. Just a neutral acknowledgement that a chapter had closed. I didn't attend the funeral. I saw photos in the newspaper. Oliver was there, looking somber. Vivienne attended, though she stayed in the background. A handful of business associates. No crowds, no elaborate tributes, just a quiet ending to a man who lived loudly and died in disgrace. A few days later, I visited my parents' graves again. He's gone, I told them. Richard Hunt, the man who killed you, he died in prison. I don't know if that brings you peace. I don't know if you're somewhere watching all this. But if you are, I hope you know justice was served. It was late, but it came. I sat on the grass between their graves, the summer sun warm on my face. I'm 33 now. Older than you ever got to be, Mum. Dad, you'd be 56 if you'd lived. I wonder what you'd be like now. I wonder what our lives would have looked like if Richard had just paid his debts, if he'd been a decent person, if you'd gotten to raise me. A butterfly landed on Mum's headstone, wings opening and closing slowly. But that's not what happened, and I can't change the past. All I can do is make something good from what I've been given. I smiled slightly, and I think I'm doing that. The foundation helps so many kids. The library has become a real community hub. Mitchell House is always full. Your names are attached to things that matter, that help people, that make the world better. I stood up, brushing grass from my jeans. I hope you'd be proud. I hope wherever you are, you know I turned out okay. That your daughter survived and thrived and built something meaningful from tragedy. The butterfly flew away, dancing through the sunlight. I love you. I'll always love you. And I'll keep making you proud. I left the cemetery feeling lighter than I had in years. 7 years after Lady Catherine died, the foundation opened its 10th facility, a state-of-the-art residential center in Glasgow. We'd helped over 5,000 children by that point. We'd changed lives, saved lives, given hope to kids who thought they had none. I stood at the opening ceremony, cutting the ribbon, cameras flashing. I gave a speech about community and care and the importance of making sure no child felt unwanted or alone. Afterwards, a teenage girl approached me. She was maybe 16, with nervous energy and an application form clutched in her hands. "Miss Hunt," she said shyly. "I'm Emma. I was one of the first kids your foundation helped 6 years ago. I was in a really bad foster situation and you got me out, paid for therapy, got me into a good school." I remembered. Not her specifically, we helped too many children for me to remember every name, but I remembered the type of situation she'd been in. "I'm glad we could help, Emma. I wanted to tell you I got into university, Edinburgh, to study social work, because I want to help kids like me, like you did." Her eyes were shining. "I want to work for your foundation someday if you'll have me. I want to give back." I felt tears pricking at my own eyes. "We'd be honored to have you, Emma. When you finish your degree, come find us. We'll always have a place for people who understand what our kids are going through." Emma hugged me, quick and fierce, and then disappeared back into the crowd. That, I thought, was what this was all about. Not the money or the buildings or the awards the foundation had won. But Emma, Sophie. 1,000 other children who'd been helped and would grow up to help others in turn. That was the legacy. That was justice. That was how you transformed tragedy into hope. 10 years after Lady Catherine's death, I received an unexpected visitor. I was at my house in Highgate, working in my studio on designs for a new children's wing at a hospital in Leeds, when Mike called from the gate. "Miss Hunt, there's a woman here asking to see you. Says her name is Vivienne Hunt." My hand froze over my sketches. What does she want? Wouldn't say, should I send her away? I should have said yes, should have refused to see her. But curiosity and maybe something else made me say, let her in, but stay close. 5 minutes later, Vivienne stood in my entry hall. She'd aged. Her hair was streaked with gray now, pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain jacket, nothing like the designer clothes she used to favor. She looked tired, ordinary. "Hello, Alia," she said quietly. "Vivienne." We stood in awkward silence for a moment. "Why are you here?" I asked finally. "I'm not sure, honestly." Vivienne looked around the hall, at my art, my photographs, the signs of a life well lived. "I've been out of prison for 8 years. I rebuilt some semblance of a life. Small legal practice in Scotland, rented flat, no friends to speak of, but I get by. Good for you. I saw the news about your foundation's 10th facility. I saw you on television, talking about the work you're doing. And I realized," she paused, struggling with the words, "I realized that you won. This wasn't about winning. Maybe not to you, but it was to me. I spent my whole life competing, trying to be the best, the most successful, the one everyone paid attention to, and you beat me at that game without even trying to play it." She looked at me directly for the first time. "You have everything I wanted. Money, respect, a legacy that matters. People speak your name with admiration. Mine is synonymous with scandal and shame. You built something real while I grasped at empty status. Is there a point to this, Vivienne?" I wanted to say I'm sorry. The words came out rushed, like she had to get them out before she lost courage. "For everything. For every cruel word, every slight, every time I made you feel small. You didn't deserve it. You never deserved any of it." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motive. But all I saw was exhaustion and what might have been genuine regret. "Why now?" I asked. "Why after all these years?" "Because I'm dying." Vivienne said it matter-of-factly. "Breast cancer, stage 4, spread to my bones and liver. They give me maybe 6 months." I felt a complicated rush of emotions. Not joy, I wasn't happy she was dying, but not sadness either. "I'm sorry," I said, because that seemed like the thing to say. "Don't be. I earned this, probably." All the stress, all the anger I carried, all the bitterness. It probably ate me from the inside out. Vivienne smiled without humor. "Poetic justice, maybe? What do you want from me?" "Nothing. That's the thing, I don't want anything. No forgiveness, no reconciliation, no deathbed absolution." She looked at me steadily. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand why grandmother left you everything. Why Dad destroyed our family trying to hide what he did. Why you fought so hard for the truth." Vivienne took a step toward the door, then stopped. "You were always better than us. Even when you were a scared little girl trying so hard to fit in, you had something we never had. Integrity, kindness, the strength to become something good despite everything. I hated you for it then. But now I'm just grateful you survived us. Grateful you turned grandmother's money into something meaningful instead of hoarding it the way we would have." She walked to the door, then turned back one last time. "I won't bother you again, but I needed to say it. I'm sorry, and you were right about all of it." Then she left. I stood in my entry hall for a long time after she'd gone, trying to process what had just happened. Vivienne was dying, and she'd come to apologize, not to ask for anything, not to manipulate or scheme, just to say she was sorry and acknowledge that I'd been right all along. I didn't forgive her. I couldn't. The wounds were too deep, the years of hurt too embedded in who I'd become, but I appreciated the apology nonetheless, and I hoped her remaining months would bring her some peace. Vivienne died 4 months later. Oliver was with her at the end, I later learned. She'd reached out to him after visiting me, and unlike me, he'd chosen to spend time with her in her final days. I didn't attend the funeral. But I sent flowers, simple white lilies, with a card that read, "May you find the peace that eluded you in life." It was the most I could offer. Now, at 38 years old, I stood at a podium in the Grand Hall of Parliament, accepting an honor I'd never imagined. The James and Sarah Mitchell Foundation had been awarded the Prime Minister's Award for Charitable Excellence. We'd helped over 10,000 children in the past decade. We'd changed laws regarding foster care oversight. We'd revolutionized how society thought about orphaned and displaced children, and I was being recognized for it. "Miss Hunt," the Prime Minister said, shaking my hand and presenting me with the award, a beautiful glass sculpture. "Your work has been transformative. You've taken personal tragedy and created something profoundly good. Your parents would be immensely proud." "Thank you, Prime Minister." But this award isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who works for the foundation, everyone who's donated, everyone who's believed that every child deserves safety and love. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. I smiled and held up the award, thinking about the long journey that had brought me here. From a 5-year-old orphan to a woman with resources and power and the ability to change lives. From someone who'd been treated as less than to someone whose work mattered on a national scale. That evening, I visited Lady Catherine's grave one last time. I'd been diagnosed with my own illness the previous month, nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to make me think about mortality, about legacy, about what came next. I'd updated my will. The house in Highgate would be sold, with proceeds going to the foundation. My remaining personal wealth would establish an endowment to ensure the foundation's work continued in perpetuity. My architectural practice would close, my projects either completed or transferred to colleagues I trusted. Everything I had would go toward making sure other children didn't suffer the way I had. "I'm not dying yet," I told Lady Catherine's headstone, setting down fresh flowers. "But I'm thinking about endings, about making sure everything continues after I'm gone." The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the churchyard. "I did what you asked, grandmother. I used the evidence. I got justice for my parents, and I used your money to help others." I traced my fingers over her name carved in stone. "I hope you're at peace. I hope you're somewhere with my parents, telling them stories about the granddaughter who refused to give up." I sat down on the bench beneath the yew tree, the same bench where I'd sat so many times over the past decade. "I'm not angry anymore," I said softly. I was, for a long time, angry at Richard for what he did. Angry at Vivienne for her cruelty, angry at Oliver for his cowardice, angry at the universe for taking my parents so young. A bird sang somewhere in the branches above me, but anger is exhausting, and it doesn't change anything, so I let it go. I transformed it into something else, into purpose, into action, into building something that mattered. I pulled out my phone and showed the headstone a photo, as if Lady Catherine could see it. "This is Mitchell House number 12. We're opening it next month in Cardiff. And this," I swiped to another photo. "This is Emma, remember I told you about her? The girl who was one of our first success stories. She finished her degree last year. She's running our Edinburgh facility now. She's brilliant." I swiped through more photos. Children smiling, families being reunited, graduation ceremonies, award presentations, a decade of good work captured in images. "This is your legacy, grandmother." Not just the money, but what the money became. You saw something in me that even I didn't see, strength, potential, the ability to turn pain into purpose. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for giving me the tools to fight back. Thank you for loving me when no one else in that family could. The sun dipped below the horizon and the churchyard grew darker. I stood up, preparing to leave. "I'll keep going," I promised. "For as long as I can. The foundation will outlive me, I've made sure of that. Your money will keep helping children long after I'm gone. That's how legacies work. They ripple outward, touching lives we'll never meet, creating good we'll never witness." I kissed my fingers and pressed them to her headstone, just as I'd done to my parents so many times. "Rest well, Grandmother Catherine, you earned it." 3 years later, on a bright spring morning, I stood in the garden of my home in Highgate, preparing for a visitor. I was 41 now. My health issue had been managed, though it required ongoing treatment. I'd stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the foundation, handing control to Emma and a team of people I trusted completely. I still designed occasionally, small projects that interested me, but mostly I spent my time reading, gardening, and enjoying the quiet life I'd built. The doorbell rang. Mike, still working for me after all these years, more friend now than security, answered it and showed my visitor through to the garden. Oliver Hunt looked older. He was 44 now, his hair graying at the temples, lines around his eyes, but he looked healthier than I'd seen him in years. Settled, at peace. "Alia," he said, standing awkwardly at the edge of the garden. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Sit down, Oliver. Would you like tea?" We sat at the small wrought iron table I'd placed under the apple tree. I poured tea, Earl Grey, nothing fancy, and we sat in silence for a moment. "How have you been?" Oliver asked finally. "Good. Busy with the foundation, though I'm less involved now. Emma runs most of it." I sipped my tea. "You?" "Good as well. The charity work in Manchester is fulfilling. I'm actually getting married next month to another social worker. Her name is Rachel. She's wonderful." "Congratulations." "Thank you." Oliver set down his cup. "I wanted to invite you to the wedding. I know that's probably strange, given everything. But Rachel knows our history, all of it, and she said I should ask. That you deserved the option, at least." I considered this. Oliver, who'd stood by while I was mistreated. Oliver, who'd only found his courage when it was almost too late. Oliver, who'd nevertheless come forward with evidence that helped convict his father and sister. Oliver, who'd spent the last decade trying to become a better person. "I appreciate the invitation," I said carefully, "but I don't think I'll attend. Not because I wish you ill, I hope you and Rachel are very happy together." "But because we're not family, Oliver, we never really were," he nodded slowly. "I understand. I expected that answer, honestly." He looked at me directly. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Do you think people can change? Really change, I mean. Not just behavior, but who they fundamentally are?" I thought about Richard, who died unrepentant despite his apology. About Vivienne, who'd only found remorse when facing death. About Oliver himself, trying so hard to atone for years of passivity. "I think people can grow," I said finally. "They can make better choices, develop empathy they didn't have before, become more conscious of their impact on others. Whether that's change or just growth, I don't know. Maybe the distinction doesn't matter." "Have you changed?" Oliver asked. "Or just grown?" "Both, probably. I'm not the scared little girl trying desperately to belong anymore. I'm not even the angry young woman fighting for justice. I'm someone who's learned that healing doesn't require forgiveness, that peace doesn't require reconciliation, that you can acknowledge someone's apology without absolving them of their actions." I refilled our cups. "I've learned that family is what you build, not what you're born into. That legacy is what you leave behind, not what you inherit. That money is just a tool. It can be used for good or ill, and the choice of which defines who you are." Oliver smiled slightly. "You've become wise." "I've become tired," I corrected. "Tired of anger, tired of fighting, tired of carrying pain, so I put it down, not because I forgave anyone, but because carrying it was hurting me more than them." We finished our tea in companionable silence. Then Oliver stood to leave. "Thank you for seeing me, Alia. I know you didn't have to." "You're welcome." He turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you, of what you've built, who you've become." I know my pride doesn't mean anything to you, but I wanted to say it anyway. "It means something," I said honestly. "Not everything, but something." Oliver left, and I sat in my garden as the afternoon sun warmed my face. I thought about the past, about the long road from that terrible birthday party to this quiet moment, about justice and revenge and healing and peace. I thought about my parents, whose deaths had set everything in motion, about Lady Catherine, who'd given me the tools to fight back, about Richard and Vivienne, who'd faced consequences for their actions, about Oliver trying to build a good life from the wreckage of his family's sins. And I thought about me, Alia Hunt, orphan, survivor, architect, philanthropist. The girl who'd been told she wasn't real family, who'd been treated as less than, who'd been paid off like a servant. The woman who'd taken that pain and transformed it into something meaningful. Who'd helped thousands of children find safety and love. Who'd built a legacy that would outlive her. I picked up my phone and opened my photos, scrolling through years of memories. The foundation's openings, children's faces, award ceremonies, the library bearing my parents' names, Mitchell House in all its iterations. This was my life. This was my family, not the Hunts, but the children we'd helped, the staff who dedicated themselves to the work, the community we'd built around the simple idea that every child deserved to feel wanted. This was justice, not revenge, not punishment, but transformation. taking tragedy and creating hope, taking wealth and using it to lift others up. This was peace, not forgetting, not forgiving everything, but choosing to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than hurt, to create light in the places where darkness had been. I stood up, brushing off my dress, and walked into my house. There was work to be done, always work to be done. A new facility to plan, fundraising to organize, children to help. But for now, I'd sit in my study with a cup of tea and a good book, in the home I'd made for myself, living the life I'd built from nothing. I'd survived the hunts. I'd survived Richard's crime and Vivienne's cruelty and years of feeling unwanted. I'd survived the trial and the media frenzy and the hatred of people who thought I was stealing an inheritance. And I hadn't just survived, I'd thrived. I was Alia Hunt, daughter of James and Sarah Mitchell. Granddaughter in spirit if not blood of Catherine Aliner Hunt. Builder of legacies, helper of children, creator of hope. And I was free. 15 years after Lady Catherine's death, the James and Sarah Mitchell Foundation celebrated its anniversary with a gala at the Natural History Museum in London. Over 500 people attended, donors, politicians, celebrities, and most importantly, some of the children and young adults we'd helped over the years. I stood near the back of the museum's great hall, beneath the suspended whale skeleton, watching the celebration unfold. I was 43 now, content to let Emma and the other staff take center stage. This was their night as much as mine. They'd done the actual work while I'd provided resources. A young woman approached me, maybe 25, professionally dressed, confident in her bearing. "Miss Hunt, I'm not sure if you remember me. My name is Sophie. I was one of the first children your foundation helped when I was 7. I did remember, the little girl who'd drawn me a picture of her new family, who'd thanked me for giving her a home. Sophie, of course I remember. Look at you all grown up. What are you doing now?" "I'm a solicitor, actually. Family law, specializing in children's rights. I work with kids in care, making sure they get proper legal representation." She smiled. "Because someone once made sure I got everything I needed to succeed, now I'm paying it forward." My eyes stung with tears. "Sophie, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you." "I wanted to tell you something," Sophie said, her voice becoming more serious. "When I was 7, I thought I was worthless. I thought the fact that no one wanted to keep me meant there was something wrong with me. Your foundation didn't just give me a new family, it gave me the belief that I deserved a family, that I mattered." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of a little girl, maybe 5 years old, with Sophie's smile. "This is my daughter, Aliner, named after Lady Catherine Hunt, whose money started the foundation. I'm raising her to know that family isn't about blood, it's about love and commitment and showing up every day." Sophie looked at me directly. "You saved my life, Miss Hunt, and now I'm trying to save others. That's your legacy." After Sophie walked away, I stood there for a long moment, overwhelmed with emotion. This was what it had all been for. Not the money or the properties or the satisfaction of seeing Richard convicted, but Sophie, Emma, the thousands of other children who'd been helped. The ripple effects that would continue long after I was gone. I slipped out of the gala early, taking a car service back to Highgate. At home, I made tea and sat in my study, looking at the photos on my walls. My parents, young and happy, before their lives were cut short. Lady Catherine, imperious and kind all at once. The various incarnations of Mitchell House. Children I'd met over the years, their faces full of hope. And one new photo I'd commissioned, an artist's rendering of what my parents might have looked like if they'd lived. If they'd been here to see me grow up, to walk me through life's challenges, to celebrate my successes. "I hope you'd be proud," I whispered to their images. "I hope I've honored your memory. I hope the life I've built is worthy of the sacrifice you made." The house was quiet around me, just me and my thoughts and the legacy I'd built from tragedy. I was done fighting now, done seeking justice or revenge or any of the things that had driven me for so long. Richard was dead. Vivienne was dead. The Hunt family was scattered and broken, their legacy one of scandal and shame. My legacy was different. It was children finding homes. It was young adults like Sophie becoming lawyers and social workers and teachers, dedicated to helping the next generation. It was buildings that bore my parents' names, doing good work every day. It was the simple knowledge that when I died, the world would be measurably better than it had been, that my existence had mattered, that I'd taken pain and transformed it into purpose. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in years. No nightmares about the fire, no anxiety about legal battles. No anger keeping me awake, just peace. The peace that comes from knowing you've done what you set out to do, that you've honored the people you lost, that you've built something meaningful from nothing. I was Alia Hunt, I was an orphan who became an architect who became a philanthropist. I was a survivor who became a champion for other survivors. I was a woman who refused to let tragedy define her, who instead used it to fuel transformation. And I was, finally, completely free. The inheritance I never wanted had become the tool that changed everything. Lady Catherine's £28 million had helped thousands of children, built lasting institutions, created ripples of good that would continue long after all of us were gone. Richard had killed my parents for £250,000. He destroyed our family, stolen my childhood, and spent 22 years hiding his crime. But in the end, good had triumphed over evil. Truth had won over lies. And the money that came from that tragedy had been transformed into something beautiful. My parents' deaths hadn't been meaningless. Their legacy lived on in the foundation that bore their names, in the children we'd helped, in the society we'd slowly changed through our work. And their daughter had survived, had thrived, had become someone they could be proud of. That was justice. That was healing. That was peace. I opened my laptop and began to write, a memoir maybe, or just thoughts for myself. The story of how a 5-year-old orphan became the woman sitting in this study, with resources and influence and the satisfaction of knowing she'd mattered. My name is Alia Hunt, I typed, and this is the story of how I discovered that the man I called father for 23 years murdered my real parents. But more importantly, it's the story of how I took that tragedy and built something good. How I honored the people I'd lost. How I found family in unexpected places. How I learned that healing doesn't require forgiveness, that peace doesn't require reconciliation, and that the best revenge is living well and helping others do the same. I wrote late into the night, the words flowing easily. My story, my truth, my legacy. And when I finally finished and climbed into bed as dawn was breaking, I felt something I hadn't felt in 38 years. Complete, whole, home, not in the house where I lived, but in myself, in the life I'd built, in the peace I'd found. In the knowledge that I'd survived everything thrown at me and emerged not just intact but stronger, better, more capable of love and empathy and kindness than the people who tried to break me. I'd won, not by destroying my enemies, though they'd been destroyed anyway by their own choices, but by becoming someone they could never be, by building something they never could, by transforming pain into purpose and tragedy into triumph. I'd won by refusing to become like them. By choosing compassion over cruelty, generosity over greed, purpose over pettiness. I'd won by surviving. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.